Are you tired of seeing applications with dull, forgettable interfaces that look like they were designed in a corporate cubicle in 2005? In a world of AI and humanoid robots, most government apps still look like relics from the dial-up era. Clunky, confusing, and painfully outdated. Every time you've encountered one of these digital dinosaurs, something inside you probably whispered, "I could do so much better than this." And you know what? You absolutely can. So, hi there, and welcome to a brand new React Native course you've been waiting for months. Today, we're building a full stack real estate application from scratch. Yep, from a blank screen, no pre-made templates, shortcuts, every line of code explained in detail. With authentication with Google for secure user sign-ins, a homepage showcasing the latest and recommended properties complete with search and filters, an explore page to browse all property types, a property details page to dive into specifics, and a profile page with customizable settings. This may sound simple, but don't let the simplicity of 5 screens fool you. Almost every single mobile app in existence has those 5 screens. So, this app will teach you some serious skills on how to implement authentication with authorization, structure dynamic routing for seamless navigation, build your own mini version of the TanStack use query for centralized data fetching, master local and global state management, design database architecture for scalability, write reusable, type-safe, clean code, and so much more. But the best part of all is I will do everything from scratch. No pre-made styles. I'll explain everything line by line as you requested. And we're doing it with the latest tools. Expo SDK 52, the officially recommended framework for React Native, featuring the new architecture. Appwrite, the open source backend as a service solution powering our backend. TypeScript for type-safe code. And Tailwind CSS for fast, responsive, and modern styling. By the end of this video, you won't just know how to build apps. You'll know how to build them better than most developers out there. And alongside this course, I've also prepared a complete Figma design, so you can choose to build along or just try to rebuild the app on your own, as well as a complete React Native handbook that you can use alongside this video to optimize your learning. Of course, everything is completely free, and the links are down in the description. So let's turn that "I could do better" into "watch me do better." To get started building our great application, we'll start from bare beginnings by creating a new empty folder on our desktop. I'll call it React Native Restate, but feel free to call it however you want. Once you do that, you can open it up within your code editor. In my case, I'll be using WebStorm. It used to be paid, but as of recently, it became completely free for non-commercial use, and I enjoy using it since, because IDEs do indeed have some advantages over regular text editors. And I'll show you some of the cool things you can do throughout this course. So once you open it up within your editor of choice, let's initialize our application. To build our app, we'll of course use React Native, as you have to learn React once and then you can write it everywhere. You can use it to write desktop applications, web applications through Next.js or other frameworks, and what we'll do in this video to develop mobile applications on both Android and iOS operating systems. If you head over to Get Started, it'll show you exactly how you can start using React Native. And they say that they believe that the best way to experience React Native is through a framework, which is a toolbox with all the necessary APIs to let you build production-ready apps. You can use it without a framework, but we found that most developers benefit from using a React Native framework like Expo, providing you with features like file-based routing, high-quality universal libraries, and the ability to write plugins that modify native code without having to manage native files. In simple words, Expo is to React Native as Next.js is to React. So of course, we'll choose it as the recommended approach of starting a new React Native application. So let's go ahead and follow the first step, and that is to create a new Expo project. We can copy this command right here, and then type it in right within your terminal. npx create-expo-app, add latest, and then add the / to create it in the current repository. It'll ask you whether you want to install the following package. That's the installer for the Expo application, so we'll say why, of course. And now it'll create an Expo project using the default template. So as it's doing that, we can take a look at all of the files and folders that it has generated. And the WebStorm conveniently asked me whether we want to install all of the dependencies, so you can either run npm install, or I think expo start will actually do it for you. While that is happening, we need to set up Expo Go, which is our development environment for mobile applications. Basically, where you can run your projects, even if you don't have an Android or iOS device. So first things first, you have to choose where you want to develop. We recommend using a real device to develop, since you'll get to see exactly what your users will see, and you'll be able to test your application directly on your phone. So feel free to choose any option from here. I'll go with my real iOS device. You can develop using Expo Go, and then it'll simply give you a QR code to download Expo Go from the App Store. Similarly, if you choose Android device, then it's going to give you a link to download it from the Play Store. These are the two quickest ways, because for the Android emulator, you'll actually have to download Android Studio, which is a very heavy application that takes a lot of time to download and a lot of energy to run. Similarly, if you want to develop on the iOS simulator, you would need to install Xcode, which also takes a lot of processing power. So it's much better to run it natively on your device, as Expo makes it so simple. Once you download it and open it up on your device, it should look something like this. So let's go ahead and start developing. To start the development server, we need to run npx expo start and then open the app on our device. So let's do just that. I'll head back to my application and run npm expo start. As soon as you do that, you'll notice that it'll immediately run it. And if you scroll up, you should also be given a QR code that you can scan. If you're using Android, you can scan it directly through the Expo Go application, or on iOS, you'll have to go to your camera app. And that should look something like this. Just scan it and click Open in Expo Go. That'll download all the necessary files needed to make it run. And there we go. We are now live. So now that our application is running, it says go to tabs index.tsx, which is right here under app, tabs index.tsx, which is our homepage. You'll notice that this looks very similar to basic React or maybe even Next.js. So the only thing you have to do to actually modify the code is to delete it. So let's actually remove everything from here besides a parallax scroll view and just render a piece of text. That's gonna look something like this. We can use theme text, why not? And within it, we can say something like welcome to your new application with a type of title. And there we go. You can see how easily you can modify your app. Now, before we dive into styling everything further, let's actually explore the entire file and folder structure so you fully understand everything we'll be doing to this application. Let's start from the bottom. First things first, we have a tsconfig.json. This file contains the rules that TypeScript will use to enforce type safety throughout the project. Next, we have a package.json, which contains the project dependencies, scripts, and metadata. We have the app.json file, which contains the configuration options for the project and is called the app.config. These options change the behavior of your project while developing, building, submitting, or updating your application. So let's go through these changes a bit further. First, we have the expo object, which is the root object containing all the app configuration. Next, we have the name, which is the application display name, which is shown on the home screen or the app list. You can check your Expo app and make sure that it has the same name. Or if you want to, you can rename it. Next, we have the slug, which is a unique identifier for the project used by Expo, used for defining the URL of your project if you want to check it out in the browser. Next, we have the version of your application. Next, we have the default orientation, whether it should be portrait or landscape. We have the path to the application's icon, a scheme, which is a custom URL to enable deep linking. Let's actually rename this to restate, so we can have some links that say restate and then some path like this to more easily open some specific parts of our app. Next, we have the user interface style, which determines whether it should be light, dark, or automatic. We have the new architecture enabled, which uses newer versions of React Native for better performance. And I actually want to take a second here to explain what's happening. This new architecture is also known as a bridgeless architecture, meaning that before we had to have a bridge that would communicate between JavaScript and native mobile application code. This communication was solely based on that bridge, leading to issues like performance bottlenecks, delays, jerky or empty frames, and so much more. But in the new architecture, we don't have that bridge at all. React Native has introduced new methods like Fabric for rendering, Turbo modules for native modules, and JSI to allow direct synchronous communication between JavaScript and native code without the bridge. With these, React Native eliminates performance issues we had with old Arc and others. And the best thing is that as we're talking about this, Expo immediately supports this new architecture without you needing to do anything. And along this, you can also use the latest React features like transitions. Moving ahead, we have the iOS-specific features, whether we want to extend them on tablet devices, and same thing for Android-specific properties. Similarly, we have some web-specific properties as well. Now, coming out of the app.json, we have some other files, like the git ignore, where you can choose which files and folders you want to ignore from Git. After that, we have a scripts folder, which is used for resetting the project to bare minimum code, and some boilerplate code like hooks, constants for storing constants, some assets, and finally, the app folder, which contains the routing functionality similar to that of Next.js, only with a bit of difference. As you can see, there is a tabs group, which has more files. If you modify the tabs index.tsx as we did, it'll show up immediately. So instead of us having to manually remove some of the other stuff as well, let's run the reset project script to see how an empty project would look like. So I will open up a new terminal window by pressing plus right here, and then I'll run npm run reset project. If you do that, it'll run it completely, and now we need to rerun npx expo start to start the development server. So let's do just that. I will stop it from running by pressing Ctrl+C, and I'll run npx expo start. Once that happens, you can just use the R on your keyboard in your terminal to reload the application. And then you can remove the app example folder, and we only have a very clean app folder which contains an index.tsx file that says edit app index.tsx to edit this screen, which means that we have now properly set up our development environment for developing mobile applications on both Android or iOS devices, depending on what you prefer. But actually, you're developing for both systems at the same time. So with that in mind, in the next lesson, let's go ahead and set up our project routes. So let's create all the necessary routes for our application. To make that process and the rest of the app build much easier, I've also prepared a complete Figma design of the application we'll build. It's linked in the description of this video. So just get the link and head over to the design part. I even provided a couple of different variations, but we'll be using this blue color scheme that indicates trust when purchasing or renting real estate. We have different colors here. We have the splash screen, the authentication screen, as well as the home, details, search, filters, and profiles. Everything that a mobile application needs to have. If you look more closely, you'll notice that there is an auth screen, where we'll use Google to authenticate the users. Then there are different screens like the homepage, which has the tabs at the bottom. And that one is similar to Explore page, which also has those tabs at the bottom. And the same thing goes for the profile. Finally, there is another details page screen, this one right here, which doesn't have the tabs. So we'll have to keep that in mind when configuring our screens. We have to make sure the tabs are only available on specific screens. So first, let's create a new file within the app, and let's call it signin.tsx. That's sign-in.tsx. WebStorm asks me if I want it to be tracked. Sure, let's go ahead and add it. And let's just create a simple React arrow function component in it. But actually, can we do rn fce, maybe something like this, React Native functional component, or React Native functional component with exports. Yep, this is looking great to me. So it's rnfe, which is a snippet that quickly creates a new React Native component. You can get the snippet by heading over to your code editor and then heading over to plugins or packages. And then you can search for something like React or React Native snippets. You should be able to very quickly find it. In this case, I'm using modern React snippets. So as you can see, we have a simple page that uses a view, which you can think of as a div in regular web development, and text, which you can think of as a paragraph. But in React Native, it's a text. Now we want to move our app index.tsx, which is this one, into a new folder so we can show the tabs. So let's create a new folder. Let's call it, in parentheses, root. And then within the root, let's create another route group and let's call it tabs in parentheses. And now we can move the index.tsx within the tabs. Now within it, we can create two other screens that will include tabs. And that'll be explore.tsx page, where we can also run rnfe to quickly spin it up. And we can create another one, which will be called profile.tsx to show our user profile, rnfe, and we should be good to go. And finally, outside of the tabs, we'll also need to show property details. So let's create a new page under app, root, but not within the tabs. And let's create a new folder called properties. And since we're using the file-based routing similar to Next.js, we can actually create a new file where you can put square brackets, ID, and then .tsx. So here it's a bit different. Instead of declaring a new folder, that'll be within square brackets, like in Next.js. Here, you do it directly within the file. You can also run rnfe. We can call this one property, as in property details, real estate properties. And I can show you how we can also extract this ID at the top. Similar to Next.js, you can say const destructure the ID from use local search params. And this you can import from expo router. It automatically provides you with the functionality to get that ID from the routing parameters. So now you can say property, and then you can declare the ID so we can see on which property we're on. Finally, we can modify the homepage by heading over to tabs, index.tsx, to see if the routes are working. I'll remain within the view and remove this piece of text. And instead, I will add a new link that'll have an href equal to /sign in, and it'll say sign in. We of course have to import this link component by saying import link coming from expo router, and we can duplicate it 3 times. The second one will point to the explore page. So we can say explore, and the text will also say explore. After that, we can have the profile page. So that's going to be /profile. And finally, we can have /properties, /1 as the default example property that we have, which will lead to property details. So if I save this, I'll now need to open up the terminal and press R to reload the application. I'll also click allow right here. And you can see that now on the home page, we can access the sign in page. If I click, you can go to it. And the pretty cool thing is that on iOS, you typically swipe from the left to the right to go back. And you can see that this motion is natively implemented. Same thing as the top back button. On Android, it's going to be a bit different, but the key thing is that it works on both operating systems straight out of the box. And we can now navigate all of these different pages we have created. They're not looking good and they're not containing any code whatsoever right now, but they will soon. Before we code them out though, we'll want to set up some kind of a theme for our application to make the styling easier. After all, we want to achieve this beautiful design, right? On web, we would use something like Tailwind CSS, but in React Native, we'll use Nativewind. Do you like using Tailwind CSS to style your apps? Well, this helps you do that in React Native. It's not a component library, it's a styling library, allowing you to just more easily style your components. So let's head over to getting started with Expo Router, and here we can follow the installation steps. First things first, switch over from npm to Expo, and then copy the installation command. After that, we can head to our second terminal and paste the command. npx expo install, Nativewind, Tailwind CSS, and all the other good stuff. When that gets installed, run npx tailwind css init. This will create a new tailwind.config.js file, which you can find right here. Now we want to modify it a bit, so simply copy this tailwind config from here and paste it in here. And I also noticed that I missed running the npx pod install to finish the installation of React Native Reanimated. So let's also paste that into the terminal as well. Should be pretty simple. Once that is done, we can create a CSS file called globals.css and add the Tailwind CSS directives. So let's head over into the app and let's create a new file called globals.css and simply paste the Tailwind CSS directives. After that, we have to add the Babel preset. So copy this babel.config.js code and create a new file called babel.config.js and paste it right here. It has to be outside of the app, so within the root of your application. After that, if your project does not have a metro.config, you can set up a new metro config file. So let's copy mpx expo customize metro config and paste it to your terminal. This will generate a new metro config file. So make sure to copy and paste the code from here into it. It'll make sure that it includes Nativewind. Finally, we can head over to our app_layout.tsx, which is right here. And here we can import the globals.css by saying import /globals.css to add Tailwind to our application. That was the fifth step. And optionally for TypeScript, we need to add an additional file called nativewind-env.ts. So let's create a new file right here, new file called nativewind-env.d.ts. And within it, you can add this piece of code. That's it. Now we can restart our server one more time by going to our terminal and pressing Ctrl+C to stop it from running, and then pressing mpx expo start again to rerun it on our application, and then press R to reload. Finally, let's head over to our index.tsx of the tabs. And by the way, to immediately switch to a file like what I have done right now, you just have to press Command or Control+P and then start typing the name of the file you want to switch to. It's much easier than going here and then manually heading over into it. So let's test it out. I will add a new piece of text right here at the top. And it can say something like, welcome to Restate, which is the name of our application. And to make sure that Tailwind CSS works, we can give it a class name equal to font-bold, text-lg, and margin Y of 10. If you save it and reload, the changes did not take effect, and we got one warning saying route nativewind.d.ts is missing the required export. Ensure a React component is exported as default. Oh, it looks like I created it accidentally within the app, but it was supposed to be right here outside in the root of the directory. So now that error is gone, but Tailwind CSS is still not activated. We are importing the globals.css within the layout, and we have properly created all of the necessary files like Metro, Babel, and even the Tailwind config. If we head over into the Metro config, you'll notice that the second parameter of this with Nativewind function is actually the path to our globals.css file. And I just said /globals.css, but it was supposed to be /app/globals.css. So if we fix this, and also if we head over into tailwind.config.js, here, alongside tracking the changes in the app folder, we'll also have to track the changes in the components folder. So let's copy this path, paste it here, and say /components, and then everything else is the same. Now, the changes will not take effect until you stop your application from running completely by pressing Ctrl+C and then rerun it with mpx expo start, and only then reload the application. I struggle with this all the time. I make some changes, but it's not like doing web development where everything happens instantly. Still, sometimes whenever you change routes or some big setup things like this, you will need to stop your application and then rerun it entirely. But with that in mind, you can now see that if you head over to tabs, index.tsx, the font bold, text LG, and margin Y of 10 are actually getting applied on this welcome to restate text. So that's great. That means that Nativewind has been successfully set up. In the next lesson, let's set up the fonts and assets we'll use throughout this application. To make this project look as good as it does in the design, we have to have many different assets that make it what it is, such as this splash screen icon, or this icon showing different properties, or even these little icons right here that show the user how many beds, baths, and square feet there is. Now, what you could do is manually download each one of these icons from the design by just clicking on it, like right here, heading down and then exporting it as a PNG or SVG or whatever. You can totally do that. But just to make that process a bit simpler and to show you how you can properly name the downloads or the exports from this Figma file, I provided you with the complete zip file of all of the assets and fonts. So just head over to the GitHub repo, scroll down to the README and snippets to copy, and just download it. First, you'll be able to find the assets. So delete the current assets that you have here by deleting them, and then download, unzip, and paste the new ones right here in the root of your application. It should contain the fonts, the icons, and the images we'll use throughout the rest of the project. You can do the same thing with constants. Copy them and paste them right here. Constants will include some predefined data for the cards, the imports of all of the icons, as well as the exports, so we can use them more simply, as well as the imports and exports of all of the images. No code that contains logic here, just plain old static data. Now, let's head over to our app.json, and within here, we can manage our icon. That's the icon that'll be displayed in the splash screen. This one is looking good, and it already points to the icon.png that we have added right here, but we have to change this one right here to point from adaptive icon to just icon.png as well. Let's see what else do we have. The favicon is looking good. Next, we have images, splash-icon.png, and finally, we have to add the fonts. So right above experiments, add a new array right here, and within it, create a new string called expo-font, which is a special package which we'll install right now. And as the second parameter, add an object saying fonts. And then within it, we can declare different fonts right here. We can import them coming from /assets/fonts/Rubik-bold.ttf. And you can keep repeating that for all of the other variations of the font that we have, such as Rubik bold is going to become extra bold. After that, we're going to have a Rubik-medium. We can also have Rubik-light. Let's have Rubik-regular. And finally, Rubik-semi-bold. All of these, if properly structured, let's just make sure that happens. We have to put it right here, one space above. There we go. So now it's properly structured. And remove this extra comma. And this one, because we're working with the JSON file. So you can see we're simply importing all of the fonts from assets fonts right here, so we can use them within our application. And another thing you can notice right here is a new way of setting up a splash screen within Expo using Expo splash screen package. Instead of saying image width is 200, we can remove this image width altogether, change the resize mode to cover, and then we can also add enable full screen image _legacy. I found this field to help with showing the splash screen on the full screen. But the important thing to take away is that this is all completely new in Expo. Before, there wasn't a specific Expo package that you can use to set up splash screen, but now there is, and you can configure it just like this as shown in the documentation. Everything is right here within Expo docs. And absolutely the same thing is happening with Expo fonts, allowing you to do it all within a single config file. Now, let's head over to our _layout, and let's load all of these fonts by saying import, use fonts, and this is coming from Expo font. Next, we can load them by saying const fonts loaded is equal to use fonts, and to it, you can pass a map of all of the fonts and their font's name, such as Rubik-bold, and here we can require, and then a path to that font, such as /assets/fonts/Rubik-bold.ttf. And we can duplicate this and do the same thing for different fonts. So let me duplicate it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 more times. We can go from Rubik bold to Rubik extra bold. We can also change the font name to Rubik extra bold. After that, we can do Rubik light and change this to light as well. Finally, we have Rubik medium. After medium, we of course have regular. And after regular, we have semi-bold. So that'll look something like this. Finally, we can use a use effect right here, still like in good old React, and say if fonts loaded, In that case, we can run splash screen coming from export router dot hide async. So if fonts have loaded, we can hide the splash screen and continue to the app. So as a dependency, I will check whether the fonts have loaded. Also, if for whatever reason fonts don't load, so if not fonts loaded, we can simply return null, and else we'll return the stack of the router, meaning show us whatever page we should be on. Now, in order to use those custom fonts and colors, we have to head over to tailwind.config.js, and we need to extend our theme. So here, under extend, we can choose the font family, and then we can put an object where we can call a font rubric by its name, and then we can provide an array of all of the different fonts, such as rubric-regular, and then sans serif. We can do the same thing for other fonts, such as rubric-bold, and choose rubric bold. That's going to look like this, or sans serif. We can repeat that for extra bold, and we're going to say extra bold right here. We can repeat it a few more times. I notice it's spelled bold 2 times here. So from extra bold, we're going to go to medium. Here, we're going to also go to rubric medium. After that, we're going to have rubric semi-bold. Same thing here, rubric semi-bold. And finally, we'll have rubric light. So let's change this over to rubric light, as well as rubric light right here. Now we can also extend the colors besides just extending the font family. So we have to do it within the extend part, right next to the font family, and that's going to be colors. Now, conveniently, this auto-filled some of the colors for me, but we don't want to get those colors. We want to get the colors from our design. And we're going to have multiple versions of each variant. So for the primary, we'll have a variation of 100. Next, we're going to have a variation of 200. And we're going to have a variation of 300 as well. So where can we find those colors? Well, you can find all of them within the design. Obviously, blue is our primary color. So if you choose one shade of blue right here, you can see that it is this color right here. And then we apply different opacities of that color to get different shades of the primary color. Same thing for our black variant. So let's copy this first one and put it right here. After that, we can get the second one, but you can notice that it is actually the same color. So if we copy it and paste it here, it's going to say that it's the same thing. But we can apply different opacities by saying 0A at the end, and on this one saying 1A, different shades or different opacities of the color will be applied. So this is applying a 10% opacity right here. And then finally for the 300, it'll be the base variant of that color. So now we can see the difference between those three. We can do the same thing for the accent color. For that one, we're going to have just one variant of 100. That's going to be hash FBFBFD. That's going to be a whitish color. And finally, we're going to have a black color. For the black, we're going to have a default, which will just be pure black. So that's the default. And then after that, we'll also have variants for 100, which is going to be something like hash 8C8E98. That's going to be a grayish color. After that, we're going to have 200, which is going to be something like 666876. And another shade of 300, which will be a hash of 191D31. Finally, we need a red color, which will be called danger. And danger will be hash F75555. That's kind of an orangish reddish color. Great. Now to test whether everything works as expected, let's stop our server from running by pressing Ctrl+C and then rerun it by saying npx expo start, and then press R to reload. If you reload, back in your expo application, you should now see that favicon that we selected, React Native Real Estate. There we go. That's looking amazing. So you can see how easy it is to change the splash screen. Now, after each new reload, a splash screen will appear, and then it'll load the fonts. So to check out the fonts, we can head over to our index.tsx, right here where we have the text, and we can say font-rubric, And we can also maybe add a text-3XL instead of text-LG. If I save this, you can see that now it has a completely different font. Now, before we proceed doing anything else, if you check out the constants, you'll notice that there are errors happening, saying that our imports don't actually exist, or something like cannot find module, or its corresponding type declarations. This issue is actually coming from TypeScript, and I'll show you how we can fix it. Right in the root of your application, create a new file called image.d.ts. D stands for declaration, and here we can declare different TypeScript rules. So let's say declare module *.png, so all PNG files, const value will be any, and export default value. So we know that we're just exporting different PNGs of a type any, and that's okay. Now we can duplicate this 1, 2, 3 more times, or let's do it 4 times for different type extensions. We can have a .jpg, .jpeg, maybe a .gif, as well as a .svg. And now we have declared the types for all of these images. So if you open it up within constants, you should see that those type errors are now gone. Great. So now we not only have the routes, but we also have the fonts as well as the base theming of our application. So soon enough, we'll be able to start coding out our first screen. The first screen we'll develop is of course the sign in screen because it's the first thing that a user sees. But before we do that, let's modify all the screens to remove this ugly default header at the top. Go to _layout and modify it to hide the navbar. We can do that by saying stack screen options and say header shown will be set to false. If you do that and reload, it'll immediately be gone, but now our text will be moved to the top left of the screen. That's not a bad thing because now we will implement the real UI of that page. So let's head over to sign in, and instead of having a view, let's actually change this to safe area view. Safe area view, coming from React Native safe area context, ensures that whatever you're trying to show safely fits within the borders of your screen, no matter which screen that is, be that an iPhone, Android, or something else. You can see how now that sign in came from the top left all the way to here within a visible zone. I'll also give it a class name equal to bg-white as well as h-full. Next, I'll remove this text and I'll add a scroll view, allowing the user to scroll if their device height is too small to be able to see the full thing. And I'll import it from React Native. To this scroll view, I will apply a content container class name equal to h-full to give it a full height. Within it, I will render an image coming from React Native as well. This will be a self-closing image tag that'll have a source equal to images.onboarding, a class name equal to w-full and h-4/6, and a resize mode equal to contain. So that's gonna look something like this. But of course, we have to fix this typo in the class name, and we have to import images coming from constants images. So that's gonna be import images from @constants/images from where we're exporting all of the images we're creating. That's gonna look something like this. If you head over there, you can see all of them, and immediately this image pops up right here and makes our application look so much better. Right below that image, let's render a view. And as I already told you, view in React Native is just like a regular div in web development. So let's give it a class name of padding x of 10 to create some space. Within it, let's render a piece of text that says, welcome to restate. We can style it a bit by giving it a class name of text-base, text-center, uppercase, font-rubric, and text-black-200. There we go. That's just a smaller subtitle. Below it, we can render another piece of text. This will be the primary heading with a class name equal to text-3XL, font-rubric-bold, text-black-300, text-center, and a margin top of 2 to divide it a bit from the top. Within it, we can say something like, let's get you closer to, and then we can create some space right here by putting a new line character. And then within it, we can render another piece of text that'll say your ideal home. Now make sure to properly close it. And there we go. Let's get you closer to, new line, your ideal home. We can also change the class name on this text to be something like text-primary-300. Much easier than having to manually type the hexadecimal value of that color, right? We just get it from Tailwind. Now below this text that's containing the smaller one, let's create another text. And this one for now, we'll simply say login to restate with Google. And here we can render a class name of text-lg, font-rubric, text-black-200, text-center, and a margin top of 12. Now below that text, we can render our first button, but it's not called a button here. It's actually called a touchable opacity, coming from React Native. A bit of a weird name, I know, but if you think about it, you're not clicking a button, you're actually touching it. So that's why it's called a touchable opacity in React Native. You can give it an onPress handler, which can be equal to handle login. So once we click on it or press on it, you can then call the handle login function. So let me create it right here at the top by saying const handle login is equal to an empty React arrow function for now. And this touchable opacity can also have a class name equal to bg-white shadow-md shadow-zinc-300 rounded-full w-full padding y of 4 and margin top of 5. And now we can slowly start seeing this button appear, but it'll be much more visible once we render a Google image right within it. So that'll be an image with a source of icons.google with a class name equal to w of 5 and h of 5 for width and the height, and a resize mode equal to contain. Of course, icons is coming from constants like images, so we have to import it right here. Import icons from constants icons. And with that, you should be able to see this Google icon. Let's see if it shows up if I reload. Head over to sign in. And no, it's still not there, even though I'm properly linking to the Google icon. Interesting. Let's try to put it within a view first to properly center it. So I'll create a new view that'll have a class name equal to flex. And now I'll put this image right within that view that is then within the touchable opacity. So that's going to look something like this. I'll also give it a flex-row and items-center, as well as justify-center. And then right after the image, still within the view, I will render a piece of text that'll say something like continue with Google. And I can style it further by giving it a class name of text-lg, font-rubric-medium, text-black-300, and a margin left to divide it a bit from the logo. But why is the logo not showing? Oh, I see. It's my web development self sabotaging me. And that'll happen a lot when developing React Native applications. Even though the goal is to make it so similar to web development, some things will be just a bit different. Like here, to the image, instead of passing an src, you would need to pass a source. I think that's the same as in Next.js, so actually we're good. But yeah, this is looking good now. And hey, believe it or not, this is it. This is our first screen. Yep, in a matter of minutes, you have successfully developed the UI and the UX of our first screen. Is it only an image, a piece of text, and a button? Sure, it is. But hey, you've developed it. And you can actually click on this button, you can scroll up and down to see more, and it's just looking great. But now we have to actually make it work. So in the next lesson, I'll show you how we can set up a backend as a service tool, which we'll use to host our database and which will help us with the auth. If you watched more than a couple of my videos, then you already know that I love using Appwrite, as it allows me to set up my entire backend within minutes. It's open source and it allows you to implement auth, databases, storage, even messaging, and more. So if I scroll down a bit, you can see that without the hassle, we can get secure login for all of the users, databases where we can store, query, and manage data, and even fully customize our backend. Now, why am I telling you this? Isn't Appwrite just for web applications? Well, not at all. If you head over to the docs, you'll see Apple and even React Native supported as one of the technologies we can use to start building with Appwrite. In this course, we'll use it for auth, databases, and storage. And later on, you'll be able to work on this project further to improve it by making it into a CMS where other users or agents can add their own real estate properties right to the application. So with that in mind, click the special Appwrite link down in the description to be able to follow along and see exactly what I'm seeing during the setup. You'll also get some free credits, even though you won't be needing them, because Appwrite is completely free for unlimited projects that never get paused, and you get plenty of storage. So let's get started. I already have quite a couple of projects active, but this time let's create a new project. Let's call it something like JSM _, and then you can put whatever name you want. In this case, I'll do restate, but you can use something else. Next, you can choose the region. So far, only Frankfurt is available, but in the future, there's gonna be many other regions, and new project has been created. Once you open it, you'll be able to choose React Native as an option right here, and you can enter your application name. I'll call it restate once again, with a package name of com.jsm.restate. And then you can copy this command that allows you to install Appwrite SDK for React Native and the required dependencies, and you can paste it right here within your second terminal. While that is installing, let's go to the next step. You won't have to initialize the SDK right here by following the steps, as I'll teach you how to do that very soon. So, all set, let's go to the dashboard. And where were we? I believe we were setting up the auth. So let's head over to the auth part, go to settings, and choose Google Auth. It'll be right here in the middle. And now we need to keep this page open, copy the redirect URI, and then we have to set up oAuth on the Google side of things. So head over to console.cloud.google.com, and it should lead you to a page that looks like this. There, you need to create a new project, and I'll call it Restate. Click Create, and it'll be created within a minute. Now, select Project, head into it, and then at the top, you can search for Google Auth, and this will lead you to the Google Auth platform. Head over to Clients and get started. Here, you can enter the app name, such as Restate, as well as the support email. You can say that this app will be used externally with other users, and you can put your contact email address. Finally, agree to sell your soul, and continue. Now, create a new oAuth client. Application type can be web, as it's most similar to a React Native application, and it doesn't really matter. And add an authorized redirect URI, the one that you copied from Appwrite. Yep, this one right here. Click Create, and there we go. You have your Google OAuth client. So now, copy the client ID and the secret. You can get the client ID from here, and then paste it over to Appwrite. And you can get the secret by clicking on the web client and zooming out a bit. And there we go. Client secret is right here on the right. You can add it right here under App Secret and click Update. There we go. Google Authentication has been updated and it has been enabled. Now, before we dive into code, we'll have to register another platform type in Appwrite to make sure that this auth works. That's because Appwrite is handling the oAuth sign-in for us here. So the redirects will be of the Appwrite domain. These redirects will create a session for our application and then redirect us to our app. So head over to the overview and scroll down and create a new platform. Choose Web App, enter a name, something like Restate Web, and set the host name as *, meaning everything, just to make sure we can reach it. Click Next, and we'll deal with the setup later. So now just skip these optional steps and copy the project ID right here at the top. Go back to your app and create a new .local.env, or rather .env.local file. There, you can say expo_public _Appwrite _project _ID and make it equal to the project ID that you just copied, as well as expo public Appwrite endpoint, which will be equal to the endpoint of the Appwrite service. So that's https:// cloud.appwrite.io/v1. And now that our Appwrite project as well as the Google Authentication have been set up, in the next lesson, we'll focus on integrating Appwrite's SDKs right within our code. The entire setup of our Appwrite SDK will be happening in a single file, just to keep everything organized. So within the root of our application, create a new folder and call it lib, as in library. And within the lib, create a new file called appwrite.ts. Within it, we can set up our Appwrite client. We can do that by first exporting our configuration object by saying export const config is equal to an object where we can define the platform that we specified before. I believe that was com.jsm.restate. For you, it might have been something different. You have entered this during the setup. And I'm not sure if we can actually get to the same name that you used once again. You can just go here and see the name, but not the actual platform that you entered. So hopefully you can remember it. If not, you can rewatch the video to see what I used, or just create a new platform. After that, we can define an endpoint, and that's going to be equal to process.env.expo_public_appwrite_endpoint. So we're simply referring to our environment variable. And then we can have another one for the project ID, which will be equal to expo public appwrite project ID. After that, we can define and export a new version of the Appwrite client by saying export const client is equal to new client. This client is of course coming from React Native Appwrite. And then we can say client.set endpoint to be equal to config.endpoint. Now, TypeScript is not sure whether we have added this environment variable or not. So to let it know, hey, I know that it is here. I entered it. We can add an exclamation mark right here at the end. After that, we can call a .setProject and pass in the config.project ID. And finally, we can call the .setPlatform and set that to be equal to config.platform. Next, we'll have to define which different functionalities we're going to use from Appwrite. So we can say export const avatar. We'll use avatars to generate an image avatar based on the user's first and last name. So that's going to be new avatars coming from React Native Appwrite, to which we pass the client we created. And we'll also do export const account is equal to new account, which is also coming from React Native Appwrite, to which we pass the client, which will allow us to create new user accounts. Now that we have this setup out of the way, we can create a new action. I'll call it export async function login. Yep, we're implementing the functionality to authenticate our user. I'll open up a try and catch block just to make sure that everything goes right. But if it doesn't, we can catch it and we can deal with it. So in the catch, I'll simply say console.error, error, and I will return false, meaning something went wrong. But what if something goes right? Well, first things first, we need to generate a redirect URI to handle the oAuth response. So once we go to Google, we have to go back to our application, letting us know that we have authenticated. So for that, we'll use an Expo module for handling deep links and redirect URLs called Expo linking. It's already added as one of the dependencies of Expo, so it's super simple to use it. At the top, you'll just say import everything as linking from Expo linking. And then right here, you can generate that redirect URI by saying const redirect URI is equal to linking dot create URL, to which you pass just a / URL pointing to the homepage. And this URL should all be uppercased. You can see how as soon as WebStorm found a method of create URL right here, it automatically told me that the first parameter of that method is actually the path by letting me know right here. Pretty cool. And if it had more, it would tell me what they are. Now, once we have the redirect URI that we want to redirect back to, we have to request an oAuth token from Appwrite using the Google provider. And we can do that by saying const response is equal to await account dot create oAuth 2 token. And to it, we have to pass a couple of parameters. The first parameter is the provider. So that's going to be equal to oAuth provider dot Google. So let's find it here. And then as the second parameter, we can pass the redirect URI. And of course, this oAuth provider is actually coming from React Native Appwrite. Perfect. Let's actually put this in multiple lines so we can see it more easily. That is await account that create oAuth 2 token. As the first parameter, we pass the oAuth provider.google, and as the second, the redirect URI. After that, we can check if no response exists, then we can throw a new error saying something like failed to login. But if we have successfully created the oAuth 2 token, then we can open up a web browser session for oAuth process to continue by saying const browser result is equal to await open auth session async, to which we can pass the response dot to string. So this is the response from Google, as well as the redirect URI. You know how when you're in a mobile application and then sometimes it opens up that mobile browser within the app? Well, this is what we're doing here, and it is needed to properly use oAuth and authenticate using Google. After that, we can check if browser result dot type is not equal to success. In that case, we can simply throw a new error and say something like failed to login, or you can be a bit more descriptive if you want to. But if everything went right, we can parse the newly returned URL to extract the query parameters by saying const URL is equal to new URL of browser result.url. And then we can extract the secret as well as the user ID by saying const secret is equal to url.searchparams.get secret dot to string, because we want to get the string of that. And then we can do the same thing for the user ID. We can extract it from the URL by saying url.searchparams.get user ID to string. Finally, if no secret or no user ID exists, we can throw a new error saying failed to login. But if we pass that check, then we can finally create a new account session by saying const session is equal to await account.create session and pass in the user ID as well as the secret. Finally, if no session exists, we can throw a new error saying failed to create a session. But if we have successfully created a session, you can either return the session or just return true, meaning we're successfully logged in. Now that we have the login function, we also have to very quickly create a logout function. So I will collapse this function right here, and right below it, I'll create a new export async function logout. And of course, it'll be much simpler. I'll open up a try and catch block. In the catch, I'll cancel the error and return false. But in the try, I'll say await account.delete session and then pass in the current, which will delete the currently existing session. And we have to create another function, which will allow us to fetch the information about the currently logged in user. That'll look something like this. Export async function get user. We can open up a try and catch block. In the catch, we can cancel the error and return null. But in the catch, we can try to fetch the response by saying await account.get. And finally, if there is a response $$ID, in that case, we want to form a new user avatar, meaning generate an image containing that user's initials. Appwrite makes that super simple by saying const user avatar is equal to avatar.get initials. And to it, you can pass the result.name, which we get from Google. In this case, that's going to be a response. Finally, if that goes right, we can put the return response right here, and we can return an object where we spread the entire response, as well as set the avatar to be equal to user avatar.toString. So we can use it nicely on the front end. Great. So this was the major part of Appwrite SDK integration done. specifically the part allowing us to sign our user in. So in the next lesson, we'll use these functions we've created to integrate them directly within our beautiful sign-in screen. To integrate auth within our screen, let's go ahead and implement the login function right within the handle login function within the sign-in screen. I'll make this function asynchronous because within it, we have to call this login action we have created. So I'll say const result is equal to await login. Of course, coming from lib Appwrite. Next, if we get back the result, we can either navigate to the home screen, or for the time being, we can just put a console log of login successful. So that's gonna look something like this. Else, if we don't get back the response or the result, we can just do an alert, .alert, and that can be something like error, failed to login. And this alert is coming from React Native. So it's all built right into it. Now, we're not gonna test the login just yet. First, we wanna integrate a function that will fetch the user session to see if they're logged in or not. We can manually call it and handle all the related states, like loading, errors, and more. And this will be the same for all other Appwrite requests. Quite some boilerplate code. Error handling, loading states, and so much more. So instead of doing it for every single request, repeating ourselves, we can create a TanStack query-like hook that handles loading, error states, and gives us back our data depending on function parameters that we pass in, along the ability to refetch or request the same API again. So let me teach you how to make your code more scalable and reusable. I'll head over into the lib and create a new file called useAppwrite.ts. Typically, when a file starts with use, you know it'll be a custom hook. Now, in this file, I'll give you special code that you can copy from the description down below, head over to the GitHub README, code snippets to copy, and then just paste it right here. I want to make sure that you can paste it so we can together go through it and I can explain everything. The whole goal of this file is to create a new custom React hook that helps us manage Appwrite API calls with state and error handling. Now, since we'll be managing different kinds of calls, like get calls for properties, create calls, filter calls and search calls, and many other calls, we want to make sure that this function works for every single type of Appwrite call. So for that reason, we have to use some kind of generic TypeScript parameters like T and P, which allow us to not immediately define the type of a property. Rather, we can assign it once we actually pass some things into the function. So this function accepts different params, and we will define those params as P once they come in. So the P type will actually be different depending on the type of call we're making. That's why we had to define some of these interfaces here, just to make sure everything is type safe. Now, what is happening within this function? Well, we define the states for the data itself once it gets here. We then define the states for loading as well as error handling. And then we have a simple fetch data function, which tries to fetch the corresponding data with the right parameters. And once it fetches it, it simply sets it to the state. What it also does is sets the errors and loadings. Finally, we call it and return all of the necessary data with the possibility to display loading states, error states, and even the ability to refetch the data if needed. This function will make a lot of sense very soon as we start using it within our other screens. Now, in addition to getting this data, we'll also have to protect our screens and properly redirect users. First, we'll create a global auth provider and fetch the current user. And if the user is not there, then we'll redirect to the sign-in screen, or if it is, to the home screen. So let's create a new file within the lib folder, and let's call it globalprovider.tsx. Within it, we'll use React context. So we can say const global context is equal to create context coming from React. We can say that it'll be of a type global context type, which we can define soon, or undefined, and we can set undefined as the default value. Now, let's define how this global context type will look like. We can do that by defining an interface right here at the top called global context type. First, we'll have an is logged in property. just to let us know whether the user has been logged in, of a type Boolean. Let's make this in uppercase. After that, we'll get the user, which will be of a type user or null. But hey, how does the actual user look like? Well, let's define another interface of called user, which will have a $ID property equal to string. It'll have a name equal to string, an email equal to string as well, and finally an avatar equal to string too. Alongside the user, we want to have the global loading state of a type Boolean, as well as the refetch function. This refetch will be a callback function that accepts new params based off of which we can call that refetch function, and it'll be of a type record that accepts a string and then a string or a number, and it will return a promise of void. There we go. So finally, we can create a global provider by saying export const global provider, which will be equal to a React functional component that accepts children, and we can define the type of that children to be equal to React node, like this. We of course have to import it from React. And finally, we can open up a function block. Within it, we can immediately return the global context dot provider. And then, as you know, with React context, you can return all the children immediately within it. The goal of this component is not to render any data. It is to wrap the screens with the global context dot provider, which then has access to the values that we want to keep. So in those values, we want to have things like is logged in, user data, and more. And thankfully, we can get all of that by calling the custom use Appwrite hook we have created. So now you'll get to see how we can use it. I'll say const and then destructure something and call it use Appwrite. To it, we need to pass an object of options, specifically a function that we can call. And here, the function will be get current user, which is one of the functions we have defined. So let's actually import it at the top, coming from Appwrite. That'll be equal to import get current user, coming from /Appwrite. Remember, it's the function we have created. Let's see if I can find it here. We have login, logout, and then get user. We can call it maybe get current user, so it makes more sense because it's the session of the currently logged in user. There we go. So now we have the get user. We're calling the get user. And then immediately out of that, we're getting back a couple of things. We get back the data, which in this case is the actual user. We get the loading state, as well as the ability to refetch the user if necessary. You see how simple it is to call this use Appwrite custom hook once you know what you need to pass in. You just simply pass in the function that you want to call. Later on, you can literally reuse this part, which handles the loading, the error states, and more, by just changing the function you're trying to call. Next, we can also just define whether the isLoggedIn property is true by saying const isLoggedIn, and it'll be equal to ! user. Now, why are we doing a double exclamation mark? Well, if you call the exclamation mark on null or an empty user, then it'll turn to true, and you want to call it once again on true to get access to false, meaning user doesn't exist. But if you call it on an existing user, so if you call it on an existing object that has maybe a name of Adrian, then this will actually turn false because an object is truthy by default. So if something is there, you will get a true Boolean value. So in simple words, we use double exclamation mark when we want to turn truthy or falsy values, such as nulls or objects, into Boolean values. After that, we can also console.log the user to see some data about it, maybe by saying json.stringify user null2. This will simply allow us to nicely display the user information in the console. And we can pass all of those values right here into the global context so we can get them from anywhere in the code, such as is logged in, the actual user data, loading, and refetch. And finally, we need a function that will allow us to more easily consume this data from the context. Let's create it. and call it use global context as a hook, which will be of a type global context type. And within the function block, we can say const context is equal to use context coming from React, to which we can pass the global context, which we want to call. If there is no context, then we're going to throw a new error saying use global context must be used within a provider, else we'll simply return .context. And let's not forget to export default the global provider so we can actually wrap all of our screens with it. So let's head over to underscore layout and let's wrap our entire application with the global provider. That'll look something like this. I'll put this return statement in multiple lines, and I will start wrapping it right here by calling the global provider, which we just exported, and then we can put the stack right within it. What this means is that every single screen will now have access to the data within the global provider. You can see user role guests missing scope account. If I head back to local and reload, we have this great splash screen, and we can head back over to sign in, and it's looking great. Now, I believe this warning right here will be gone as soon as we sign in, but if it appears later on, we can easily deal with it. For now, I'll just dismiss it, and I'll say continue with Google. You can see now it says Expo wants to use Appwrite.io to sign in. Yep, we'll continue. I chose my JavaScript Mastery account, and I'll click continue. And now the browser closed, and we got a console log of login success. This is the only thing that we needed to see. So let's give it a shot. Let's head over to signin.tsx, and instead of simply saying login success, let's redirect the user to the home screen. We can do that by first getting access to a couple of things from our global context, such as refetch, loading, as well as is logged in. And that's going to be equal to use global context. There we go. Now, what we could do is just redirect, but we are already redirecting whenever we do a refetch. So right here, we can just do a refetch, and that'll automatically redirect to the home screen. So let's go back, reload, and as you can see, now we get back all the information about this specific user. But hey, why can you still go over to the sign-in page? Shouldn't you be automatically redirected to the home? Well, yes, let's go ahead and add a check. I'll say if not loading and if is logged in, we can automatically return a redirect coming from Expo router pointing to a /, meaning homepage. So if I save this, whenever you try to go to sign in, you will automatically be redirected back to home. Great. But before we conclude auth, let's make sure that if a user is not there, the user should not see any other pages and must be automatically redirected to the sign-in page. So instead of applying the same but reverse check in every single screen from homepage, explore, profile, and properties, we can do it in a parent layout of these screens. So let's create a new file under app, root, and create a file called _layout.tsx. This is a special layout for the properties and tabs, meaning all the pages that the users have to be authenticated to be able to see. Within here, we can export default function app layout. Within here, we can get access to the loading state and is logged in state by simply calling our use global context. How convenient that is. After that, if it is loading, we can return a safe area view, and within it, we can show an activity indicator. Think of this as a loader with a class name equal to text-primary-300 and a size of large. Now, maybe we can make this always true for now so we can see what we're working on. And if not is logged in, we can simply redirect to the sign-in page. That'll look something like this. href of the redirect will be equal to /sign-in. Of course, the redirect itself is coming from Expo router. And if we're not loading and if we are logged in, then we can simply return a slot, meaning the current screen that we want to show. The slot, of course, coming from Expo Router. Perfect. Let's give this safe area view a class name equal to bg white, h-full, flex, justify-center, and items-center. Now let's try to reload the app. And now you can see this beautiful activity indicator, but it should only happen if we are loading. So if loading, then show the activity indicator, else if not logged in, point to the sign in, else just give me the screen. And that's exactly where we're at right now. We're logged in, we have the currently active user, and we have successfully implemented the auth. So whenever you make some file changes, like adding a new layout, always remember to go to the terminal and press R to reload. Now let's head back over to the global provider and let's remove this console log because we indeed know that the user is there. So in the next lesson, let's go back to our index.tsx and let's turn these ugly links into a tab navigation system that looks much cleaner. To start working on our app's primary navigation, also known as tabs, let's go ahead and create a new file right here under tabs. I'll call it _layout.tsx. Yep, we'll have yet another layout specifically for the 3 pages that we'll be able to navigate through tabs. So we can create it as a shared piece of UI among all 3 pages directly within here. I'll create a new RNFE to quickly spin up a new layout, and I'll call it tabs. We need to reload our application. Don't forget to do that often. And now you can see just tabs at the top left. What we have to do now is wrap everything with the tabs. So tabs is actually a special component coming from React Native. So that'll look something like this. But of course, we cannot have 2 of the same names. So I'll rename this to tabs layout. And then this will be tabs coming from Expo Router. Now, these tabs also have some extra options. So let's say screen options is equal to tab bar show label will be set to false. We don't want to show the label. After that, we have a tab bar style, and we can define it by choosing a background color. It'll be of a color white. We can choose a position. We want to choose absolute. We can next choose a border top color, which will be our primary color, #0061FF1A, and we can choose a border top width of 1, as well as a min height of about 70. And now you can see the tabs appear right here at the bottom. Within the tabs, we can define different screens. So let's create the first screen by saying tabs.screen. It'll be a self-closing component, so we can do it like this, and provide a name equal to index, which is our homepage, with some additional options, such as a title of home, a header shown for that specific screen of false, and then also for each one of these tab screens, we can also choose how we want to display our icon by saying tab bar icon, and we'll do it completely custom by, for now, just returning a piece of view that has a text of home. But as you can see, you can't really fit a lot of text right here as an icon. So instead of that, let's create a custom tab icon component at the top. Const tab icon is equal to a function with an immediate return that looks like this, that returns a view, and within the view, it'll render an image. This image will of course come from React Native, and we can pass a couple of props, such as, is this the currently active one, or focused icon? What is the icon, and what is the title we want to display? And we can define different types for this. Focused is a Boolean, icon can be any, and title will be of a type string. We can also import all the different icons by saying import icons from @/constants/icons. And now we can render source icon coming from props. So instead of rendering a piece of text that says home, let's actually render this tab bar icon by rendering tab icon. And to it, we can pass an image equal to, or no, it was icon, equal to icons.home. If I do this, you can see a big home icon appear. We can also give it a focus state equal to focused, and that is coming directly right here through props of the tab bar icon function. And finally, we can give it a title equal to home. Now we can dive into this tab icon component and style it further. We can style this view by giving it a class name of flex-1, margin top of 3, flex, flex-call, and items-center. Next, we can give this image a tint color depending on the focus state. So if it's focused, we can give it the regular color of #0061FF, else it can be #666876. This is our secondary color. We can also give it a resize mode equal to contain, as well as a class name equal to size of 6. And now it looks a bit nicer. Right below it, we can also render a piece of text that has a class name equal to. Now it'll be dynamic depending on the focus state. So if focused is true, then we can render a text primary 300 with a font of Rubik medium. But else, if it's not focused, we can give it a text black 200 with a font of Rubik. And it can also have a text extra small, W full, text-center, as well as margin top of 1, always, no matter the focus state. And within it, we can render the title. There we go. So now we have a nice home icon. Now it'll be super simple to reuse this for other screens. I will simply copy this entire tab screen and duplicate it 2 more times. For the first one, I'll change the name over to Explore. It has to match the name of our page or the screen with a title of Explore. I'll pass in the icons.search as well as the title of Explore. And finally, for the last one, I'll give it a name of Profile, a title of Profile, and icons of Person, because we want to show the profile page. And now you can see how nice those 3 icons look like at the bottom. And if you click on each one of them, you can see it actually navigates to a different screen and the active state changes. This is looking amazing. And it was pretty simple to make, right? I'll reload the application just to make sure that everything is looking good. And I can even head over to index.tsx to remove the navigation from here. There we go. Now we have the home, the Explore, and oh, it says home. Looks like I forgot to change the label or the title. In this case, it was supposed to say Profile. There we go. This is now looking amazing, and we are ready to continue. Now, we could either focus on the home or the Explore first, but actually, I want to tackle the profile page first, because on the profile page, we'll have a logout button. So that way, we can complete the auth cycle by allowing users to log in, but also to log out. So in the next lesson, let's implement the profile screen. To start implementing the profile screen, let's head over to tabs profile.tsx. And first, we'll develop the UI. So let's start right at the top by defining a function which we'll have on this page called handle logout. And that'll be equal to an async callback function, which for now we'll leave completely empty. Right within JSX, since we'll have more elements on the screen and some smaller height devices might not be able to fit all of them immediately, I will wrap it into a safe area view coming from React Native safe area view. Now let's switch over to profile on our phone so we can see it. And you can see that profile now fits nicely within there. I'll also give it a class name of h-full, as well as a background of white. Instead of having a simple piece of text that says profile, within this safe area view, I'll put a scroll view so we can nicely scroll in between the elements if they don't fit on the screen. This scroll view will have 2 different properties. The first one will be shows vertical scroll indicator, and I will set it to false. And the second one will be a content container class name set to padding bottom of 32 and padding x of 7 to create some space. Of course, let's import this scroll view coming from React Native. Right within it, we can now display a view. This view will contain a piece of text that simply says profile, and we can style it a bit further by giving it a class name of text-extra large, as well as font-Rubik-bold. And right below it, we can render an image that'll have a source equal to icons coming from constants icons dot bell, which is the notification icon, with a class name of size of 5. And let's not forget to import the image itself, which is a component coming from React Native. So now we can see this little bell. Let's nicely position this on the screen by giving it a class name equal to flex, flex-row, items-center, justify-between, and a margin top of 5. There we go. So now we have a nice simple heading. Let's go below this view and let's render another view that'll have a class name equal to flex-row, justify-center, flex, and a margin top of 5 to divide it a bit from the profile header. Within it, we can render another view, and this view will have a class name of flex, flex-col this time, so we'll put the elements in a column, items-center, relative, and a margin top of 5. Right within it, we will render an image. So let's say image with a source of images coming from constants dot avatar. And let's give it a class name equal to size of 44, relative, as well as a rounded dash full property. So now we can render a fake avatar image right here. Later on, we can replace it with a real avatar coming from Appwrite. And right below this image, let's render a touchable opacity, which is actually a button. And within it, we can render another image with a source equal to icons.edit, allowing the user to edit the icon with a class name of size-9. So that's going to look something like this. There we go. And we can, of course, style this touchable opacity a bit by giving it a class name of absolute, bottom-11, right-2. And let's not forget to go below the touchable opacity and add a text. That'll render your name. For now, we can put it statically here. Later on, we can get real data. So I'll put Adrian, add JS mastery, and I'll style it by giving it a class name equal to text-2XL, font-Rubik-bold, and a margin top of 2. I think I can just say JSM here, and now this will look even better. Perfect. Now let's go below this view and below one other view to create a view that will contain some settings. I'll create a view that'll have a class name equal to flex, flex-col, and a margin top of 10. And within it, we can display some settings items. Of course, I'm referring to these list items. So each list item will follow a specific structure, such as it'll have an icon, a title, and then a link to visit more info. So we can create it as a custom component right here above the profile, and I'll call it const settings item is equal to an immediate return component that returns a touchable opacity, because each one of these links will be clickable. And then within it, we can render a view. Within that view, we can render an image, within which we'll render a source of icon that we decide to pass into it, as well as a piece of text that'll simply render the title. Of course, if you run this now, we won't be able to use it because we have to pass some props to each one of these settings items. We have to accept things like an icon, a title, an on press, a text style, in case we want to style it a bit differently, as well as a show arrow, which by default will be set to true, because we want to show the arrow for most items besides the logout. Let's also say that all of these are of a type settings item props. And now we can define those props right here so we know what we need to pass in. That'll be an interface of settings item props, where we accept an icon, which will be of a type image source prop type coming from React Native. We also get a title of a type string, an onPress, which is a callback function that returns nothing, as well as a text style, which is optional, of a type string, and a show arrow, which is optional, of a type Boolean. So now let's actually call this settings item right here below. Within this view, I will call our first settings item, and you can see how WebStorm immediately fills in all of the necessary props and gives me the possibility to edit one after another. So icon will come from icons, coming from constants, and then the title will be set to my bookings. And I think we don't even need an on-press on this one. So now if we save this, it's going to say my bookings, where we get the icon, but it's complaining a bit saying that icon is not assignable. So let's see what that is about. We can also make on-press optional, as we won't need it with every single component. And this is looking good to me. Of course, this was supposed to be icons.calendar. So now you can see my bookings and then the icon. I'll also duplicate this settings item one more time below, and I'll actually make this a bit smaller so it nicely fits in one screen. There we go. I think this is much easier to look at. The second one I will change to settings.wallet, and I'll rename it to payments. Now, if we modify our settings item, we can give it some styles. By giving this touchable opacity a class name of flex, flex-row, items-center, justify-between, and a padding Y of 3. That's going to create some space. Once we click it, we can also render on-press and make it equal to the on-press that we pass in as a prop. We can further style this view by giving it a class name of flex, flex-row, items-center, and a gap of 3 in between the elements. To the image itself, we can change the size by setting the size to be equal to 6. And then for the text, we can render some additional styles, such as a class name equal to text-lg, font-rubric-medium, and text-black-300 for the color. And if we want to apply some additional styles, we can render this dynamically, end it dynamically here as well. And then we can also render the text styles, the additional ones, after these base styles that we pass as a prop to different settings items. And finally, right here below this view, we can render a dynamic block of code that checks if show arrow is true, and only if it is, then we render an image with a source equal to icons.writeArrow with a class name of size of 5. There we go. So now this is looking more like a real settings page. Now we can go a bit down below this view containing the first two settings items, and we can render another view. This time with a class name equal to flex, flex-col, margin top of 5, border of t, padding top of 5, border-primary-200. This will just add a little border to divide some settings from other settings. So now we can map over these settings coming from data.ts, .slice, and we'll slice over the first two initial ones, and then we'll map over the remaining settings. By saying map, we get an item for each one of these, as well as an index. And then we simply show a new settings item for each one of these settings. So let's render a key, since we're mapping over it. That'll be equal to the index. And we can also spread the rest of the item, item, because it'll contain the icon, the title, and more. And now immediately we get all of these other options available. And how did they get here? Well, if you command click into the settings, you'll notice that we have them under constants data.ts, where it's a simple list of objects where each object has a title and an icon. Nothing more. Finally, we have to implement a button to log out. So let's go below this view and let's actually copy that view to create one more border. There we go. And then within that view, we can render another settings item, but this one will have an icon equal to icons.logout with a title of logout, a text style equal to text-danger, a show arrow set to false, and on press, we'll simply call the handle logout function we have declared at the top. And now you can see this logout button. It is at the bottom, and that's where you typically want to place it in all app settings, because that's not an action that people frequently do. But as you can notice, even though I have a device with a lot of height, you can still scroll up and down to get to more settings. So now, before we implement the logout, let's fetch the real user data so we can display it right here instead of this fake one. I'll do that right here at the top by using the global context we have declared before. I'll say const and destructure the user as well as a refetch function, and that's going to be equal to use global context, just like so. Alongside this, we can also declare the function to logout, which will be equal to the function called logout that we created before. So I'll say const result is equal to await logout. Make sure to import it at the top. And if we do get a successful result, we will then run an alert by getting the alert functionality, .alert, and we'll say success, you have been successfully logged out. Else, we'll simply do an alert saying error, an error occurred while logging out. With that in mind, we can now use this real data right here where it says images.avatar. Instead of that, for the source, I will actually pass an object called URI and set it to be equal to user .avatar. And now we get a real avatar for JavaScript mastery for my specific account. And I can also change my name right here by rendering a real user .name, JavaScript mastery. Perfect. If you want to, you can also implement the edit profile photo later on. But for now, let's implement the logout functionality to complete the entire authentication flow. We're already doing that right here as we're already passing the handle logout to the logout button. And one more thing we can do is after a successful logout, we can run refetch, because in refetch, we're revalidating the currently logged in user and then renavigating it to the sign up page if needed. So with that said, let's go ahead and test out the logout functionality by simply pressing the logout button. Perfect, that works as expected. We'll deal with this little error message later on once we dive into the role and scope system. For now, I will dismiss it and I will sign in once again to test out the login. And there we go, I have been redirected to the home screen and we can now move between home, explore, and profile. Great. Of course, the next big thing is to implement the page that we get redirected to right after we log in, and that is the home page. So let's do that next. To start implementing our home screen, let's head over to our index.tsx under root and tabs. And let's remove everything from there besides a simple safe area view and then a simple piece of text. That'll say something like home. Perfect. Now we can first start by implementing the header of our homepage. Our header will be a simple view. So let's add it right here. View that'll have a class name of padding X of 5. And we can also make the entire screen white by giving this safe area view a class name of BG white and H-full. Now within this view, we'll have yet another view that we'll use for positioning our elements around. That'll have a class name equal to flex, flex-row, items-center, justify-between, and a margin top of 5. Within it, we'll have another view which will contain our image, and this view will have a class name equal to flex and flex-row. Within it, we can display our image. Of course, this image is coming from React Native, and it'll have a source equal to images.avatar, and images has to be imported from constants. So that'll look something like this. Of course, later on, we'll replace it with your own avatar image. We can give this image a class name equal to size of 12 and rounded-full. Below it, we can render a view, and that view will have a class name equal to flex, flex-call, items-start, margin left of 2, and justify-center. Within it, we can now display a text that says something like good morning. This is just to implement some kind of a personalization to each user. So we'll have a piece of text that says good morning, and then below it, we'll have another piece of text that will refer to the person's name. So for now, I'll say Adrian, but later on, we'll of course modify it. So let's get a class name to this first text. And this one will be a bit smaller with a text-XS for extra small, font-Rubik, text-black of 100. And this below one will have a class name equal to text-base, font-Rubik-medium, and text-black-300. Now we can head 2 view elements down and then render another image. And this image will have a source equal to icons coming from constants .bell for notifications with a class name of size-6. There we go. So now we can show the number of notifications that user has. And that is a simple header. But now we want to create a search component. You can see that on the design right here. This is what we're trying to achieve. But this search component will also be reused on the Explore page right here. So for that reason, we have to turn it into a new component. So let's create a new folder right here in the root of our directory, and let's call it components. Within the components folder, we can create a new file called search.tsx and run rnfe to quickly spin up a new search component. Now we can import it within our index right here below the header. We can do it below this view with a padding X of 5. So that'll be search. There we go. You can see it right there. And now we can head over to that search and implement it. To make our search optimized, we'll use a use debounce package, a package that allows you to make your searches more performant. And it has 1.5 million weekly downloads. I mean, just imagine creating such a cool package that 1.5 million developers use it every week. So let's install it by opening our terminal and then running npm use-debounce. And with that, we can start implementing the search. First things first, like in Next.js, here in React Native, we can modify the search parameters by taking a look at the imaginary URL that we're currently on. It's not going to be a real URL like in the browser, but we can still keep track of the path that we're currently on. Because even though this is a screen, you can still go back and forward like you can in the browser. So let's say const path is equal to use path name coming from expo router. And let's also extract the params by saying const params is equal to use local search params coming from expo router as well. From it, we get back a query, or rather an object containing the query, which is of a type string. So we can define it like this. And finally, we can create a new use state field called search. Set search at the start equal to whatever is in the params.query. And later on, we'll be able to implement the handle search function. So for now, let's just make it a regular function that accepts a text of a type string, and then it simply sets the text into the search. It'll look something like this. And now we can build the UI of this search component by first wrapping everything into a view with a class name equal to flex, flex-row, items-center, justify-between, w-full, padding X of 4, rounded-lg, it's starting to take shape, bg of accent 100, border, border-primary 100, margin top of 5, and padding Y of 2. And now we can see a little search input. Now, within this view, we can create another view, and this one will have a class name equal to flex-1, flex, flex-row, items-center, and justify-start, as well as a z-index of 50 to make it appear on top of the other elements. Within it, we can render a simple image. Of course, that image is coming from React Native, and it'll have a source equal to icons, which are coming from constants, .search. And then we can have a class name equal to a size of 5. Right below that image, we can render a text input. This is the first time we're using this kind of a component from React Native that allows us to enter some kind of information with our keyboard. And in React Native, it's not called an input, it's called a text input. It works very similarly as it does in React applications. It accepts a value, in this case of a type search, an onChange handler, in this case equal to handle search, a placeholder equal to search for anything, as well as a class name equal to text-sm, font-rubric, text-black-300, so we can see it more clearly, margin left of 2, and flex-1. And now this is starting to look more like an input, and you can actually click on it for your keyboard to open. And in this case, instead of saying onChange handler, this was supposed to be onChange text. So there we go. I'm glad that it was actually blinking red, so it let me know that I typed something wrong. And finally, right below this view, we can create a touchable opacity. Of course, that's a button. And within it, we can render an image with a source of icons.filter with a class name equal to size-5. So later on, in case we want to add some additional filters, we can click on that button on the right and lead the user to a new page to show more filtering options. With that in mind, how can we now actually handle the search? Well, it's easier than you might think. You can already start typing things in there and start searching for things like, let's do house. Yeah, we're searching for different houses, right? So you can already do that, and it works very well. But now it's up to you to use that piece of info and then search some data based off of it. But if you want to make API or database calls based on inputs, it's never good to make an input based on every keystroke, because then a user that wants to get search results for the house will first get the search results for H, and then for HO, and then for HOU, and then for the entire house, right? The user will have made 5 requests only to get back the data for one that they initially wanted to make, which is the full search term of house. So to optimize this search, we use something known as a debounce. So let's create a const debounced search and make it equal to use debounce callback that accepts a callback function of a text string and then simply returns the router.setParams, where it sets the query to be equal to the debounce text. And of course, this router is coming from Expo Router. So let's import it right here at the top. And instead of just simply setting the search, we can now call the debounce search and pass over the text that we want to pass into it. So now we won't be modifying the router every single time. We'll only modify it after some time has passed. And if you want to, you can manually put the wait time. But typically what I do is pass a second parameter, which is the wait. So that's going to be about 500 milliseconds. So if a user types house very quickly without 500 milliseconds between each keystroke, the router params will have been only sent out once instead of 5 times. I hope that makes sense. So now that we're setting this router params, we'll be able to pull that search query later on once we need to make a call to fetch all of the properties matching that query. But for the time being, we can get back to the homepage and we can implement a new section, which is going to be a featured section right below the search. We can do that by declaring another view with a class name equal to margin y of 5 to divide it a bit from the bottom and the top. Within it, we can have another view that'll have a class name equal to flex, flex-row, items-center, and justify-between. Within it, we can render a piece of text that'll say featured, and then below it, we can render a touchable opacity that'll render another text that'll say see all. So that's going to look something like this. First, let's style the featured text by giving it a class name equal to text-xl, font-rubric-bold, text-black-300. And we can also style the see all text with a class name of text-base, font-rubric-bold, and a text primary of 300. Let's of course spell this properly by calling it a class name. There we go. And I just noticed that this, as well as the search, has to be put within this inner view of padding x of 5. So we want to collapse this other view right here but actually the search and the featured section need to be within the view that has a padding X of 5, because that will push them a bit more to the middle, giving them some room to breathe on the sides. Perfect. So now we have the featured header implemented as well. Now, what it is that we're featuring? Well, real estate properties, of course, or houses and apartments. So how are we going to make each one of these cards look like? Well, we'll have two different types of cards, one for the featured section and another for a regular search. So one has to look like this and the other has to look like this. But if you think about it, they both are getting in the same exact pieces of data. The ones on the top are just a bit more prominent, a bit more featured. So what do you say that we implement both cards so we can reuse them later on as we want? I'll go ahead and head over into components and create a new component called cards.tsx. Within it, I'll run rnfe, and now we have cards. Instead of calling it cards, I'll rename this component to featured card. So we can do it something like this. And I'll actually make it a named export because we'll have two different exports from this component, the featured card, as well as a regular card, which we can call just card. So what do you say that we first implement the featured card and then do the other one next to another? I'll do that by importing both of these cards right here below this view. I'll simply say featured card as well as a card. There we go. And now we can see cards. They're both saying cards, but I can make this one say featured and I can make this one say card. There we go. So now we can start implementing them and we can see the changes that we make live on the home screen. Let's start with the featured card. Once we click it, it actually has to lead somewhere. So we have to know what happens once we press on it. So I'll pass or receive an onPress event, which will be of a type props. And then we can declare those props right here by saying interface props is equal to onPress will be optional, and it will just be a function that returns nothing. It just redirects somewhere. Now this feature card in itself will simply be a touchable opacity, meaning a button, because the whole thing will be clickable. Once we click it, we'll call the onPress function, which will most likely just do a redirect. We can also give it a class name equal to flex -call, items-start, w of 60, age of 80, and a position of relative. And within it, we can render a new image component, which will look something like this. And for now, we can give it a fake image, source equal to images coming from constants.japan, as well as a class name equal to size-full and the rounded -2XL. There we go. So now we have a nice featured Japanese apartment card. Right below this image, we'll also render another image with a source of images.card gradient with a class name equal to size-full, rounded-2XL, absolute, and bottom-0. This will add a bit of a darkish overlay to the card so we can show some more info at the bottom without it being too busy with the image in the background. This way we have white text on an image, but we still apply a bit of dark so we can clearly see the text. So let's create that view right here below. And within it, we can render an image with a source equal to icons.star. And the icons, of course, are coming from icons constants with a class name equal to size-3.5. And now if you pay close attention, you can see a little star right here beneath the card text. We'll position it properly later on. Within this view, we can also render a piece of text that'll say something like 4.4, which is right now just a fake piece of data for the rating of this property. Later on, we can make it real. Let's also style it a bit by giving it a class name equal to text-extra small, font-rubric-bold, text-primary-300, and margin left of 1. Now let's position this nicely on the card by giving it a class name of flex-row, to make them appear one after another. Items-center, BG white over 90, padding X of 3, padding Y of 1.5, rounded-full, absolute, with a top of 5 and the right of 5 to move it a bit on the top right side. And this is looking much better. I believe these cards should have also been within this view with the padding X of 5. So let me put them there so they have some nice padding. There we go. That's more like it. Now we can head below this view and create another view. This view will have a class name of flex, flex-call, items-start, absolute, bottom of 5, and inset-x-5. This will simply apply a bit of a left and right property of 20 pixels. Within it, we can now display a piece of text. So let's say that this text will be the title, something like modern apartment. Of course, later on, we'll actually pull the real data. For now, let's give it a class name of text-xl, font-rubric-extra bold, since this is the title, the most important thing, and text-white. And we can also give it a special property of number of lines equal to 1, so it will not pass one line of text. What's the second most important part? Well, it's the address. So right below it, let's render another piece of text that'll say something like, let's do 22W, 15th Street, New York, USA. Something like this should be fine. Of course, feel free to enter anything. Let's style it now by giving it a class name equal to text-base, font-rubric, and text-white. And we don't need to enter the postal address. I think this should be enough. Now we can go below this text and render another view that'll have a class name equal to flex, flex-row, items-center, justify-between, and W-full for full width. And within it, we can render another piece of text that'll display the price. So let's say something like 2,500. This could potentially be the rent and not the purchasing price of this property. So now it's totally up to you whether you want to make this an application where people can buy properties or whether they can rent them. I'll give this class name equal to text-xl, font-rubric-extra bold, as well as a text of white. And now we can see the price on the card as well. And now this is becoming much more similar to the original card. The last thing we have to do is render the heart icon in case you want to save it to your favorites. So below this text, let's render an image with a source equal to icons.heart with a class name of size of 5. And this is our featured card. But now, how would a regular card look like? It follows more or less the same principles, but we have to use less absolute positioning. We have to use it just for the rating at the top. The rest of the content will simply be displayed below the image. So let's head down and let's start implementing the skeleton of the card by turning this view into a clickable, touchable opacity, which can call the onPress equal to onPress when clicked. And it'll have a class name of flex-1, W-full, margin top of 4, padding X of 3, padding Y of 4, rounded-LG, BG of white, shadow of LG, shadow black 100 over 70. I found that color to work the best, and it'll have relative positioning. Now, of course, we also have to get the onPress from the props. So let's simply destructure onPress and make it equal to the type of props. That'll look something like this. And now we can see this card layout at the bottom. Within it, we can render a lot of the same content that we had in the other card, starting from this view, which contains the rating, and then below it, we have another view which contains the rest of the content. So let's actually copy those two views and paste them right here in between this touchable opacity. And I think I just missed copying one additional view. If I do that, everything will break But don't worry about that, because now we'll make additional changes to this touchable opacity to implement that second look of the card. The first view within it will have properties of flex, flex row, item center, but we can change the rest of the properties. It'll have a property of absolute, padding X of 2, top of 5, right of 5, BG white over 90, padding of 1, rounded dash full, and a Z index of 50. That's going to be for the rating. And then we show the same thing inside of it, but with a bit of a smaller size and a margin left of 0.5 since the card is smaller. Now we can go below that view and we can render an image. This image will have a source equal to images.New York with a class name equal to W-full, H of 40, and the rounded-LG. And now we get this second image for the smaller card. Below that image, we can render another view, which will contain the property information. It can simply have a flex, flex call, and maybe a bit of a margin, so margin top of 2. Within it, we are rendering a piece of text that's going to be of a size text-base, font-rubric of bold, no longer needed to do it extra bold, and the text will actually be black 300 instead of white, as now it is on a white background. And here we can say something like cozy studio, and no longer it has to be number of lines of 1. Below it, we can render the address in text-extra small, font rubric, and text-black-200. Below it, we have the view, flex, flex row, item center, justify between. And here, instead of W full, we can do margin top of 2. Within it, we are rendering a text-base and font-rubric-bold for the price with a text color of primary 300. And then we're showing the heart icon that'll have a class name of W5, H5, as well as a margin right of 2. And we can also give it a tint color equal to #191D31. But now what's happening here? We still cannot see all of this content, as I'm guessing it's being hidden by the image. I'll go to my terminal and reload, just to make sure, you never know. And it says text strings must be rendered within a text container. Where is it that we're trying to render something that looks like a text, but it's not put within a text element? Maybe we can get more info in the terminal. Nope, it just says it's within a view, but we don't know where that is happening. I'm not actually sure where we're trying to render a string outside of text. It seems like all strings are indeed within the text elements. If you find it, that's great. But for the time being, I will simply dismiss that error and try to see what's happening with the UI, because this card isn't really looking like the card on here. And that's because of the layout. Here, I'm rendering the card at once, but it will never actually show like this. It'll always show in a row of 2. So let's head back over to the home page and let's improve the layout for both cards. Right below the view that is below the touchable opacity, we can render the UI of our cards. I'll do it like this. First, I'll render an additional view that'll have a class name of flex, flex-row, gap of 5, and a margin top of 5 as well. And within it, I will display 2 featured cards, one after another. That'll look something like this. And right now, we cannot really scroll through them, which is not ideal. So if you added a third, you would not be able to see it. After that, we want to duplicate this entire view talking about a featured section, and we want to paste it below this view and below one more view. So that'll look something like this. And this time, instead of saying featured, we want to say something like our recommendation. That'll look something like this. It'll say the same thing, see all. And then right here, below this touchable opacity and below this view, we can render another view with a class name of flex, flex-row, a gap of 5, and a margin top of 5 as well. And here we can render 2 regular cards, 1, 2. And now this is looking a bit better. You can see that they nicely fit on the screen and all information is clearly visible. Whereas the larger featured card takes a bit more space and definitely more height, so it's more prominent. Let's say that some real estate developers or some real estate agencies want to advertise some of their properties. Well, they would be able to pay you to put them right here in the featured section. If they don't, they're going to be right here in the regular search. Perfect. Now you can see as I'm hovering or clicking over this element, it actually appears like it's clickable. So as soon as we implement the functionality, we'll be able to re-navigate to the property details page. Beautiful. Another big issue is that right now we cannot scroll through these featured properties. So that's something that we'll have to do next. But at least now we have created these reusable cards that allow us to quickly check out all of the properties featured on your app. Now, in the similar way, we have created a reusable search component, which shows right here on the top. And also later on, it'll show on the top of the Explore page. We want to implement the filters component right here that shows on top of the recommendations. We want to do it as a reusable component because it'll also show right here in Explore. So going back to the code, we can create a new component called filters.tsx and run rnfe. And we can quickly import those filters right here below our recommendation by saying filters and rendering it as a self-closing component. We can head into it and implement them right here. They'll work similarly to the search component in a way that they will modify the local search parameters. So we can say const params is equal to use local search params coming from expo router, but this time we will actually get back a type of filter, which will be an optional string property. Next, we want to create a new use state field to keep track of the filters we're setting. I'll call it selected category and set selected category. At the start equal to either params.filter, if we have already selected one, or simply a string of all. Make sure to put the uppercase A here so we can properly categorize it. After that, we'll have a function to handle the category press. So let's call it handle category press, which will take in a category of a type string and do something with it. Finally, we can implement the UI of our filters by wrapping everything into a scroll view. And here's an important thing. We'll give it a prop of horizontal. So we'll be able to horizontally scroll through all of these filters, even if they don't fit on a single screen. Let's make sure to import the scroll view from React Native, and let's give it a show horizontal scroll indicator and set it to false. We'll make it apparent that people can scroll. We don't necessarily have to show the indicator. And let's give it a class name of margin top of 3 and margin bottom of 2. And it looks like I'm missing the letter T right here in horizontal. Now, instead of showing this piece of text, we can map over the categories coming from data.ts by saying categories.map, where we get each individual category item as well as the index. And for each one, we want to return a touchable opacity because each filter will be clickable. And within it, we'll display a piece of text that will render the item.title. So it should look something like this. All houses, condos, duplexes, studios, villas, apartments, and more. But of course, we want to style each one of these pieces of text. So let's give this touchable opacity a class name of flex, flex-call, items-start, margin right of 4, padding x of 4, padding y of 2, and the rounded -full. Now we have given them some space to breathe. Let's also give it an onPress property. So once we click on it, we want to call the handle category press and pass in the item.category. So this was supposed to be handle category press right here. And instead of items, it's actually item, that specific one that we clicked on. You can see how as soon as you wrap something into a touchable opacity, it always appears like it's clickable. Like if you click it with your finger, it appears like you're clicking it. Now, how do we figure out which one is currently clicked? Well, based on the state. So we can change the styles by making this dynamic. And then we can say if selected category is triple equal to the item category, meaning if the current one is equal to the one we're currently editing the styles for, that's going to be item.category. In that case, we want to apply a BG primary of 300, and else we want to apply a BG primary of 100 with a border and border dash primary -200. And that now looks something like this. They actually seem like clickable chips that you can click and select what you want to do. Now we can style the text right here by giving it a class name. It'll be dynamic and it'll always have a text-small. But if selected category is triple equal to item.category, in that case, it'll have a text-white, else it'll have a text black of 300 with a font of Rubik. But if it's selected, it'll have a font Rubik bold with a margin top of 0.5. There we go. So now this is looking exactly as it does in the design. Perfect. And you can see how, even though we don't have any indication that a user can scroll right, they can see that Studios is kind of cut off. So immediately, if people have been using their phones a bit more, they will know that they have the option to actually horizontally scroll, or should I say swipe with their mouse right here. Perfect. And now we can implement the logic of actually selecting a category. Here we don't have to use a debounce because for each property, the user is only clicking once. So what we can do is say if selected category is triple equal to category, meaning if they click the same category that has been selected right now, what do we want to do? Well, we want to set selected category to be equal to an empty string, meaning nothing, because they want to reset their option. And we want to call the router coming from export router dot set params and set the filter to be equal to all. And we want to exit out of this handle press function. But if they haven't selected the same category, if they want to click on a new one, we will set that new selected category, as well as call the router dot set params and set the filter to be equal to this newly selected category. So now if I go to houses, you can see that gets selected. Condos, duplexes, it works. If I click on a property once again for the second time, it'll actually reset to the all category. Looking great. And with that, we have now also implemented the filters, which means that most of our homepage has now been completed. Great work on that. But what still hasn't been finalized is that we cannot scroll the homepage. You can see later on we'll have many more cards right below, but right now we cannot scroll down. Not only that we cannot scroll down, we cannot scroll left, right, we cannot do absolutely anything on this homepage besides see this 4 cards. I want to be able to see more and explore more of the application. And on mobile apps, you do that by swiping, not by navigating to many other pages. So in the next lesson, let me teach you how we can make this screen actually make sense. So you can scroll through featured cards as well as swipe down to see more of the regular cards. Great work on completing this big lesson. In the previous lesson, we created this great looking homepage UI, but it's not that functional, is it? It's not scrollable, neither up, down, nor left or right for these feature cards. Now, while we could use the scroll view in the similar way we used it in the profile screen, there are 2 different things to consider. There is a component called a scroll view, which is what we have used so far. But here, we can use something known as a flat list. Normally, flat list is used over scroll view for lists of items when you have dynamic data, as it only needs to load the elements currently visible on the screen. It's more memory efficient compared to the scroll view. And there's another thing. You can't have 2 flat lists in different directions on the same screen. The same goes for the scroll view. You can't have the scroll view, which is vertical, and then a flat list inside it, which is horizontal on the same screen. Basically, no 2 virtualized lists can be added in 2 different directions. So to address this issue, instead of using a scroll view, we'll use a flat list as the main element of the screen and then render the rest of the UI as its head component. It'll make sense once I show you how it works. First things first, right here within the safe area view, let's render a flat list, a component coming from React Native. You can immediately see that it wants me to add 2 things into it, data and a way in which we can render that data. So for the data, right now, I'll simply say an array of 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's say that I want to render 4 different numbers. And then for the render item, we can display a callback function, which will take in that item, and then it'll simply return it. Maybe something like this, or within a piece of text, just so we don't hit some React Native limitations, like this. So if we render this right here on top and reload, you can see 1, 2 barely on the top left of our screen. And if you kind of move it around, you can see that it scrolls from 1, 2, 3, 4 as well. But now let's make it look nicer. Instead of rendering just a piece of text for each one of these elements, let's render a card. And now we have some cards at the top, but we can barely see them. And it's pretty crazy how extensible this component is. You can do everything through props, such as define a list header component. So how will the header of this list look like? And as the header of this flat list, we'll actually put everything that we have here, this entire view we have created so far. I'll explain soon. Just copy it and put it right here as the list header component. Right now, you can see that everything is exactly the same, but now we have these additional cards that are being rendered as a part of this flat list. What I'll do for now, though, is remove the additional cards that we are rendering because we want to render them through a flat list, not just like this. So I'll remove them. And I will also remove these 2 cards right here. So you only want to keep the things that are needed. Okay, I hope this makes sense now. So I have rendered a flat list and I have passed 4 different elements. Maybe let's do 2 so it makes more sense. These 2 are the cards that you can see here. We are rendering them, each one as a new card. And then you can define how the header of your flat list will look like. In this case, our header is everything from filters to different headers, search, and more. Now we can continue passing additional props to the flat list to style it further, such as the key extractor, which is a way for us to provide a key to each one of the elements. And that'll be equal to item, and then we can simply return item.toString. Basically, each one will have its own ID. We can also choose a number of columns to render, and in this case, I'll make it 2. I'll reload the application, and there we go. Now we have 2. I'll also change the content container class name to give it a padding bottom of 32, meaning some space. I'll also change a column wrapper class name to make it equal to flex, a gap of 5 in between the elements, and a padding X of 5 as well, which will create some spacing. I can also choose whether I want to show the vertical scroll indicator, and I'll choose to hide it by setting it to false. And now we can see we have a similar view that we had before, but now we're actually within a flat list. So you can easily just pass additional pieces of data here, such as 3 and 4, and you can render and see those cards. Now, what we'll do in this case is pretty cool. I'll head below the featured section, which is right here, go below the touchable opacity and the view that says see all, and within here, I'll render yet another flat list that'll render additional pieces of data, such as 1, 2, 3, and within here, I will render item not as a card, but as a featured card. And that'll look something like this. We have the 3 featured cards on top, and then we have additional cards at the bottom. Now, of course, let's give these a key extractor so we can differentiate each one. And that'll be equal to item, where we get the item.toString, where each one of these is just a number, which is a unique key identifier. And the big thing is that we're going to make this horizontal. So if you do that, now we have managed to have 2 flat lists, one within another, whereas the second flat list, this one right here, is within the header component of the first flat list. Okay, so now we have the featured list on top, and then we have additional information. Great. Of course, let's further style this flat list. We have the data, render item, key extractor, and I also want to give it a bounces property set to false, because if we don't include this, you'll be able to move it left and right, but sometimes also up and down. And I only want to have the horizontal scroll here, so that's why I'll set the bounces to false. I'll say show horizontal indicator set to false as well, and a container class name equal to flex, gap of 5, and a margin top of 5 as well. There we go. Now this makes more sense. And if we turn off bounces, you'll see that now if you go, they will actually jump around as you scroll. You can move them up and down, but we only want to have horizontal scroll, which is where we're going to turn that off. And this is now looking amazing. You can actually scroll left and right on the featured section, as well as scroll up and down to see additional data coming from the first flat list. Finally, we can also render real user data now by saying const user is equal to use global context. How simple that is. And now we can render it where needed. That'll be right here under this image source, where I can now change it to be equal to URI is user dot avatar, as well as the name right here. I can change this to user dot name. And now this is fully customizable, and the UI not only looks good, but now it actually behaves as mobile applications should. In the next lesson, we'll fetch real data from the database, so we no longer have to work with these dummy pieces of data. To change this data from fake dummy data to real data, we'll have to create different collections in the database to store property details and all of the associated information. For example, a property has a name, type, which can be apartment, studio, home, and more, rating, image, number of beds, baths, associated agent with the overview, facilities, gallery, and so much more. It's important to understand the data that we need to display on the UI, specifically the structure of that data, so that you can know how to set up your database backend structure properly. So let's create different collections in our Appwrite database. Go to Databases, click Create Database, and call it Development. Once you do that, copy the ID of that database and add it to your .env.local as expo public Appwrite database ID. There we go. Now, inside the database, you'll have to create different collections. First, let's create a collection for the agent, the person that is listing that property. We can do that by creating a new collection, and let's call it Agents. You'll immediately be given the ID of that collection, so copy it and paste it right here by saying expo public Appwrite agents collection ID. Now, you can try to figure out which properties do these agents have by looking at the design. In this case, I think they have a name, an email, which we have to display somewhere or make sure that we can contact them, maybe even a phone, and a type. Is it an owner or somebody else? But for now, I'll do a simpler version of that. I'll go to Agent Attributes and create a new attribute. Of a type string, the attribute name will be name in this case. And the size can be about 500 characters, and we can make it required. So let's create it. Let's also do another one for the email, but this will be of a type email. So let's call it email, and let's make it required. And finally, I'll add another one, which will be of a type URL. And this one will be called avatar. So it'll be for their avatar URL. And let's make it required. Great. Finally, one thing that you must not forget to do is head over to Settings, Permissions, and for the time being, we can set permissions to any and give all different options, just to make sure that we can properly read the data from this collection. And now let's do a similar thing for all of the other collections we'll need to have. The second collection will be called Galleries. And this will contain the images associated with each property. Again, make sure to copy its ID, and you'll have to save it. In this case, let's save it to something like expo public Appwrite. Instead of saying agents collection ID, in this case, we'll be saying galleries collection ID. And then we have to head over to the attributes, and the gallery collection has only one attribute, and it'll be an image of a type URL. So image of a type URL, and it'll be required. Let's also not forget to set the permissions by heading right here, choosing any, and ticking all the boxes. Great. Let's create our third collection, which will be called a review. This is to store all the reviews associated with each property. So let's call it reviews. Let's copy its ID, and let's create another env, which is going to be called expo public Appwrite And this will be, of course, reviews collection ID. And each review will have 4 different attributes. First, the name of the person reviewing it. So it'll be called name with a size of 500, and it'll be required. We'll also have a URL, which will be the avatar. So let's choose a URL property of avatar. The third one will be a string of a review itself. So let's say review with a size of 5,000, a bit longer and required. And finally, the last one will be a float, which is simply a number, and it'll say rating. So this is a rating from a minimum of 0 to a maximum of 5, and it'll be required. Now we'll need to associate each review with its property, but we'll do it by creating a properties collection. So let's do our 4th and final collection called properties, and let's copy its ID and store it to our envs. That'll be expo, public, Appwrite, and then finally properties collection ID. A property will have many different attributes just to make sure that we can fit all of its info, such as a name, type, description, address, pricing, number of beds, bats, and more. So let's actually create attributes for each one of these. The first one will be a string of a type name and 5,000 characters. And let's make it required. After that, we'll add an enum. An enum is a special field. You can think of it like an array of predefined options. So let's call it type, and let's add different elements, such as house, townhouse, condo, duplex, studio, villa, apartment, other, and I think this will be good. Finally, let's set it as required and create. Each property will also have a description, so that'll be a string of description with a max of 5,000 characters, and it will be required. We can also have an address, which will be of a type string, address of 2,000 characters, and required. We'll also need the price, so let's put it as an integer, price, with a min price of 0 and required. We'll also need the square footage, or the area. So let's create a new float, which will be area, with a min of 0 and required. We can also have another integer, which will be called bedrooms, which is the number of bedrooms. So let's make it required. We can do the same thing with bathrooms. So integer of bathrooms, required as well. We'll have a float of rating. So this is the rating for the property itself. We could later on hook it up with the ratings collection. And we can also have some kind of a list of facilities. So let's create another enum. Let's call it facilities. And here we can have things like laundry. Maybe it has a parking or a gym or Wi-Fi, or it's pet friendly. These could be some different things that could impact buyer decisions. And let's make this into an array and create. Finally, we'll have a URL, which is going to be the image of that property. So let's say URL called image and required. And let's also create a string called geolocation, which I'll make about 5,000 characters. And this will contain the actual geolocation, meaning geotargets on X and Y axis of where this property is located. So I'll click create. Oh, it looks like I reached the maximum number. So maybe we'll have to make it a bit smaller. 1,000 will do. And finally, now we can create 3 more attributes, which are going to be very special because they will be relations to other 3 collections we have created so far, to agents, galleries, and reviews. So let's do agents first. I'll scroll down and I'll call it a relationship. It will be a one-way relationship with the agents collection. The relationship will be many to one, and the attribute key, just remove the S, will be equal to agent. That means that properties can contain only one agent, but agent can belong to many different properties. And choose Cascade as a deletion option and click Create. Now we can do something similar to galleries as well by creating a new relationship attribute, which is a one-way relationship to galleries. Let's call it a gallery because it'll be a one-to-many relationship, meaning that properties can contain many galleries, but gallery can only belong to one property. In this case, doing it one-to-one would also be okay. because maybe once you take pictures of one apartment, it will not appear in others. And let's also choose cascade and create. Finally, let's do a similar thing for the reviews. I'll create another relationship. This will be a two-way relationship with reviews. In this case, we can keep calling it reviews because we can have multiple reviews, but we can rename the key to property because one property can contain multiple reviews. And we'll use a many to one relation here. And I'll choose cascade as well and create. Finally, make sure that you have all of these collection IDs, as well as the database ID, endpoint, and the Appwrite project ID all right here. If you haven't copied them so far, you can get them right here under each one of these collections. And for the properties, let's not forget to head over to permissions and set it to any and tick all the permissions just to make sure that we can nicely access them. Now we can head over to our appwrite.ts file, and where we're configuring it, we can get access to all of those additional environment variables we have created, such as a database ID equal to process.env.expo_public_appwrite database ID. We can do a similar thing for the galleries collection ID equal to process.env.expo_public_appwrite galleries collection ID. We can do a similar thing for reviews collection ID, which will be equal to process.env.expo, not explo, expo public Appwrite reviews collection ID. We can do a similar thing for the agents collection ID, which will be set to process.env.expo public Appwrite agents collection ID. We can also have the properties collection ID, which will be equal to process.env.expo public Appwrite properties collection ID. I believe that should be it. And finally, we have to put this database to use so we can actually call it. So alongside using avatars and accounts functionality from Appwrite, now we'll also use the databases functionality. So we can say const databases is equal to new databases, to which we can pass our client, and make sure to export it as well. So in this lesson, you'll learn how to take a look at the design and figure out how to structure your database. After that, we have created different collections and given each one of these collections the necessary attributes to then be able to create specific documents within each one of those collections so we can then render that data within our app. In the next lesson, I'll teach you how we can quickly populate the data of agents, galleries, properties, reviews, and more so we can work with it within the application. In this lesson, we'll focus more on the UI side of things and fetching the data from the database. This will help you build a strong foundation before we move over to the backend. You already learned how you can create collections in Appwrite. So instead of writing all of the CRUD operations again, we'll use a concept known as seeding the database to quickly set things up. See, whenever you join a company, you'll be given a development version of a specific code that'll depend on some kind of a dummy data that you can test. Instead of going to manually create every single one of these properties to test it out, to speed things up, we use a process known as database seeding, which is simply a process of populating a database with the initial set of data. Common to load data such as initial user accounts or dummy data upon initial setup of the application. You can add data in three ways right here. The first one would be to build a completely new application, be that a mobile app or a web app that allows agents, not users searching for properties, but rather agents to create and list different properties by uploading the images, property data, and so much more. That's something that if this video goes well, we can explore in another video where I can teach you how to add an admin management dashboard to these real estate properties. Or if you're brave enough, you can explore doing that on your own after finishing this course. The second way we can add data is through Appwrite Cloud, and you can do that by simply head over to some of the collections like properties, and then manually create each one of these documents by filling in pieces of data, such as a name. We can do modern apartment. We can also choose a type, enter the address, and so much more. But this would take a lot of time if you had to enter a lot of properties. So we'll use a third way, and that is through seeding the database. We'll take some initial data and a seeder function that creates random agents, reviews, galleries, and properties and links them together to form relations. So first, let's get to that data, and you can get to it by heading over to the GitHub repository linked down in the description, head over to snippets, and here you'll see libdata.ts, and simply copy it, go to the lib folder, and create a new data.ts, and paste this here. You'll see that this simply contains a list of images for different galleries, agents, reviews, properties, and more. And alongside that, we also have to have a seed function. So copy it and create a new file called seed.ts and paste it right here. You'll notice this is a very long file, but don't worry about it. Seed functions are created very easily using any kind of an AI nowadays like ChatGPT, but I'll still guide you through it. What we're doing here is importing all of the data belonging to different images. We get different collections. We get different property types. And there's one thing that I want to ask of you right now to do, otherwise your application will not work properly. Make sure that the property types that we specify here exactly match the properties that you had listed as attributes right here. So if you head over to type and check out this enum, you see it says house, townhouse, condo, duplex, and so on. So in your seed function, make sure that it says townhouse, not townhouses, condo, duplex, studio, villa, apartment, and other. It has to be the same. And the same thing goes for every single other attribute. If you misspell something here, since we're working with real data, it might not work later on. So make sure that it is exactly as it is. We have the facilities, which I also changed, I believe. So if you head over to facilities right here, you'll have to copy these ones right here instead of the ones that I listed there. So that'll look something like this. I'll just make sure to provide string signs at the end of each one. That'll look something like this. And let's not forget about the commas. Perfect. When seeding the data, the hardest part is actually making sure that you're creating data with real attributes that you have listed in your database columns. After that, we try to get a random subset of items. So basically, we're pulling from all of these different types, all of the different images, all of the different reviews, and we're simply randomizing data by shuffling the random copies. It even listed the name of the algorithm that it uses to shuffle here. So trust me, I did not write this code. I just gave it to ChatGPT. And after that, we simply insert all of those documents into Appwrite collections. Same thing for reviews, galleries, and so on. And once we call this function, it should actually generate a list of randomized properties that have all of these different fields attached to them. So let's give it a shot. I'll now head over back to our homepage, and right here above the flat list, I'll add a button from React Native with a title of seed and an onPress function, which is going to call the seed function coming from our app seed.ts. So make sure to import it right here at the top. So you see this button at the top. It's barely noticeable. It's in the middle of the screen. If you click that button, it'll run a seed function. We only need to do this once. So let me reload the app, make sure that we are ready, and let's try to see what happens when we try to seed the database. Before you press it, you have to make sure that all of the property names are exactly as they are in the seed function. And you also have to make sure that you have successfully gave all permissions to all of these 4 categories to make sure that we actually have the permission to create them. With that in mind, I'll now press seed right here at the top. And I immediately get an error saying error seeding data, Appwrite exception, the current user is not authorized to perform the requested action. I was telling you about the permissions and how they could stop you from making that happen, but it looks like I caught myself in it. So let's quickly check it out. For properties in settings, I have added permissions, but if I go over to reviews and check out the settings, it looks like I forgot to add them. So let's select any, and let's tick all 4 checkboxes and click update. Perfect. Now let's go back to our app. Now I also noticed that I made one more mistake, and that is that back in the properties attributes, I created a relationship right here under properties for reviews, but I actually want to go ahead and delete that attribute that forms a relationship in between reviews and properties. And we actually want to create it on a separate collection on the reviews collection itself. So head over here, go to attributes, and create a new relationship. It'll be a two-way relationship in between properties, which we'll call property, and reviews, with a many-to-one relationship and cascading deletion. So create it, and now we'll be able to test everything out. But before we do that, head over to the README of the repo, where I'll put a list of all of the attributes and their types. So if you found it a bit fast to follow along with my video and you want to make sure that everything is properly structured, you can very quickly and easily just make sure that everything is good, and then we can proceed with the seed function. Because if one of the names of those properties is not exactly the same as it is in our seed function, the seed function might not work. So once you verify it all works, reload your application. In the seed function, also make sure that you're calling these in the same way you're calling it within your Appwrite. Let's look into some of the errors that we have. It says text strings must be rendered within a text component. And I think this issue is coming from the cards. Now, this is a very weird issue because this 4.4 text indeed is within its own text element. But check this out. For some reason, I put it within the same line as the image. What has to happen is it actually has to go on its own line. And I think I had it one more time somewhere here. There we go. This piece of text is on the same line, but it should be on a new line. So if I save this and reload, let's see if there is any more errors. And now we have a different error saying that each child in a list should have a unique key property. I think that's because here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and then here we have 1, 2, 3. So instead of that, let's simply put maybe 5, 6, and 7, and then reload. Hopefully this will get rid of that last warning, and we are then ready to try to seed our application with the real data. Nope, we still get that same key issue, but no worries, we're gonna deal with it once we fill everything with the real data. So let's go ahead and open up our terminal. You can press the letter C to clear it, and then press the seed on your phone right here at the top. It's this button right here at the top of the screen. I got an error seeding the data, so let me try to actually reload once more, and I'll click the seed button one more time. This time it said cleared all existing data, seeded 5 agents. Now it is seeding reviews. Finally, it is seeding galleries, and then it's seeding property 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. There we go. We have a lot of properties to check out, which all of them will have been added to our Appwrite database, and very soon we'll be able to fetch them from our code. So data seeding is completed, which means that the seed function has done its job. So we can actually head over to the index and remove it from the top. Remove this button because we won't need to click it anymore. So if you head over to any of these collections, you should be able to see 20 properties right here of different types. And then you can actually modify the data for each one of these, and you can see it has a relationship with different images, and even some have some reviews. So with that in mind, in the next lesson, let's implement a lesson that fetches the latest properties so we can show this real data coming from the database on the home page. To fetch the properties, let's head over to appwrite.ts, which is where we're dealing with everything regarding Appwrite from avatars, accounts, and databases. We have already implemented the login, logout, and get current user functions, but now we'll focus on fetching the properties we have seeded the database with. So right here, let's say export async function get latest properties. We can open up a new try and catch block, inside of which we get the error. Within the catch, we'll simply console.error, the actual error, as well as just return an empty array because it means we cannot fetch anything. And then in the try, I'll try to get the result by saying const result by calling the await databases.list documents. Yep, it is so simple to fetch the documents using Appwrite. We just need to provide a couple of things to let it know what we need to fetch. First, we need to provide it the database ID, which we have stored under config.databaseID. And since it's coming from envs, TypeScript wants to make sure it's there. So to let it know, hey, we know it's there, you need to add an exclamation mark at the end. After that, you have to provide a collection ID, and then finally the actual query you want to fetch the data with. So the second thing is config.properties collection ID. And finally, we want to create a query, which is going to be equal to query object coming from Appwrite dot order ascending, and we'll sort it based on $ created at. And we're going to limit the query to 5. So query.limit will be equal to 5. Finally, the only thing we have to do is return result.documents. And now we are ready to call this on the front end, or should I say on our phone. But before we do that, we'll create one more function, because the getLatest properties could technically be named getFeatured properties, because we're only going to show 5 of them right here. But we also have to create another fetch function that'll allow for querying, filtering, and more. So let's create a new one called export async function getProperties, which will accept an object with a couple of things: filter, query, and limit. And these will be of a type: filter is a string, query is a string, and a limit is optional, and it is a number. So we can define a try and catch block. In the catch, we can simply console.error, the actual error, and return an empty array as before. But in the try, we need to start building the query. Let's start by saying const build query is equal to an array where we call the query dot order descending based on the attribute of created at. And then we're going to append additional things to the query, such as if a filter exists and if filter is not equal to all. In that case, we want to apply the filter to the query as well by saying build query dot push query dot equal type, and then we're going to match it with the filter. So we will only return the properties where query is equal to the filter. That's going to look something like this. Maybe we can put it in a new line just so it's a bit easier to see. There we go. And if a query exists, meaning the search query, in that case, we want to run build query dot push, and then we can push a query dot or. So we're going to search either query dot search by name. So maybe what we're searching for is contained within the name of the property, like a modern apartment. Or maybe it's query dot search address, or maybe query dot search type, if somebody types house or condo. So we want to match all of these different queries. Finally, if there is a limit, in that case, we want to say build query dot push query dot limit, and we're going to limit it to a specific number of properties. So we're just crafting a meticulous search query that we can then pass over into the list document function. So I will copy that function right here, const result, await databases list documents, and then return result documents. And I will paste it right here at the bottom. The only difference here is that we don't have to define the query manually here. We can just pass it as build query because we have already crafted it above. Finally, we can return result.documents. Great. So now that we have those two functions, in the next lesson, let's use them within our homepage to make sure that all of this data is real and coming from the database. To display our data, we can head over into our index, which is the homepage. Then we have to extract the local search params, such as the query and filters that users might have entered before. We can do that by saying const params is equal to use local search params, and that'll be of a type object containing the query of a type string, also containing the filter, which is optional, of a type string. And then we can use that data to fetch the properties using the custom hook we have created before by saying const destructure the data as well as the loading by calling the use Appwrite hook, which then allows us to pass a function we can call, and in this case, we'll call getLatest properties. The data we're referring to in this case will actually be the latest properties, so we can rename it that way, latest properties, and loading can be latest properties loading. You can also call it featured properties. Either way is fine. And now we can do another Appwrite call by saying const, do the same thing. Data, loading. We can also get the refetch here. And that's going to be equal to use Appwrite. But now, instead of the function being get latest properties, it'll be just get properties. So this one will fetch all of them. And get properties also accepts some params, such as filter, which will be equal to params.filter, query, equal to params.query, and finally a limit. In this case, we can limit it to 6 elements per page. Now, why is it saying that a query is not there? Well, we have to make sure that we say, hey, query will be provided. And we can also provide an additional parameter of skip. So we can skip a specific number of elements if needed. Finally, whenever the filter or query changes, we actually have to recall this function to show the latest data. We can do that with a use effect. So we can define a use effect with a callback function where the dependency array is gonna be recalled whenever params.filter or params.query change. And then we can simply call the refetch function, to which we can pass the new filter equal to params.filter. We can pass a new query equal to params.query, and we can also pass a limit of 6. Great. And in this case, we can just rename data to properties because this data is referring to the properties. Finally, the last thing we have to do is put that data to use. Right here in the first flat list, I will provide the data of properties. And flat lists should be smart enough to immediately map over them. While we're here, let's also provide the latest properties to the featured collection. Right here, latest properties. And now I will reload the page by heading over to my terminal and pressing the letter R. Now, why is it that we're just still seeing the same old plain data, even though we can see a different number of that plain old data? Well, that's because we're mapping over the real properties now, but if you head over to the cards, which we are returning for each one of these, you can notice that we're not passing a real property data to each one of these cards. So now what we have to do is turn these cards from static to dynamic, and we can do it like this. First things first, I'll define an additional function called const handle card press, which is going to be equal to a callback function that accepts an ID of a card and then simply calls the router dot push to a dynamic string of /properties / and then the ID. So this will make sure to push to that specific page, to the details page of each card, and make sure to import the router coming from expo router. Once we have that, we can head over to this card right here, and we can pass over an item. Item will be equal to item. You see, a flat list is very smart in a way that you pass an array of something into it under data, and then under render each item, you can extract each individual piece of data and pass it to the rendering part. We can also pass the onPress, which will be equal to a callback function that calls the handle card press, and to it, we can pass the item dot $ID. And we'll have to repeat this over here for the featured card. That's gonna look something like this. I will simply replace it, but instead of saying card, I'll say featured card. Now let's head into the card and the featured card, and let's make it accept that real data. First things first, I'll accept an item right here at the top, and that item will be of a type models coming from Appwrite .document. And now we can take all of the data from that item and make it real. So for example, for this image right here, it won't say images.japan. It'll actually say URI is equal to the item.image. And as soon as I change that and save it and reload the page, you can now see different images loading for each one of these featured cards. And already that is making our app look so much better because it feels so much more like a real application. Let's head down. Next thing that we have is the item.rating. Of course, instead of item, you could have called it property, or what you could have done is just immediately destructured all of these properties like image, rating, and then you would have been able to simply say URI is equal to image, rating is equal to rating. So let's actually do that for other properties. We'll also need a name, we'll need an address, a price as well, and I think that's it for now. So here we're rendering the name. Below that, we are rendering the address. And finally, we are rendering the price. So now if I save this, you can see property 1, property 2, property 3. I could have been a bit more creative with the names, but the most important part is that it actually shows the real data. Now don't click on one of these properties yet, because you'll have to reload the app like I have to right now, because we don't yet have the property details page, but soon enough we will. With that in mind, this is looking good. And let's do a similar thing for the regular card. I will copy this destructuring of the properties at the top and paste it right here. And now we can do a similar thing. Instead of saying images New York, we can do URI is equal to image. Cozy Studio will now become a name. This will become an address. And finally, we have a price. There we go. And now we can see the images have changed. Now, it is possible that some of these images will repeat because we're using a randomizer function, but that's totally okay because maybe both of these two houses right next to each other are on sale. Same thing right here. Perfect. And while we're here, let's also make sure that something happens in case we have no properties. So for example, if I set the number of properties to an empty array, you can see that then we show nothing. And in a similar way, if I do it here for the latest properties, our application will look like this, but we never want that to happen. So let's actually implement a new component right here in the components folder, and let's call it no results.tsx. I'll run rnfe, and let's implement the view for no results. It'll be fairly simple. We can have a view with a class name equal to flex, items-center, and margin y of 5. Next, we can have an image, and this image will have a source of images coming from constants dot no result, as well as a class name of w of 11/12 and h of 80, and finally a resize mode equal to contain. Right below it, we can have a piece of text that says no results with a class name equal to text-to-excel, font-rubric-bold, text-black-300, and a margin top of 5. And below that text, we can have another piece of text that'll have a class name equal to text-base, text-black-100, and a margin top of 2. We could say we could not find any results. There we go. And now we can import this right within the home. And this is also pretty cool. You can pass it right into the flat list. You see how we have this flat list with many different properties. One can be list empty component. I mean, how convenient this is. You can just define it right here, and then it'll show if a list is empty. So we can say something like if it's loading, then we can show the activity indicator with a size is equal to large, as well as a class name is equal to text-primary-300 and a margin top of 5. Else, if it's not loading and there are no results, we can render the no results component we just created. So now it'll load, and then it'll show no results. Looking much better than before, right? And then for the featured, we can do something a bit different. We can completely hide the entire featured section in case there are no featured properties. So that'll look something like this. Right above the flat list, we can say if latest properties loading, then we want to show an activity indicator with a size of large and class name of text-primary-300. Else, if they're not loading, we can check if there are no latest properties, or if latest properties dot length is triple equal to 0. In that case, we can show no results. So it'll end up looking something like this. Now let's properly close it. The question mark was supposed to go here, and then a colon was supposed to go there. So one more time, if latest properties are loading, then show the activity indicator Oh, but then we have to close the activity indicator here. And then if no latest properties or latest properties length is 0, then render no results, but else render the flat list. Yep, that's what I forgot. So if there are results, then we want to show the flat list. So that'll look something like this. Let's just make sure that we're properly closing everything. Yep. But now, instead of simply displaying no data, since we have real data, we can actually display it. So let's display latest properties down below, which is going to appear as featured properties. And then right here, we can render all the properties at the top. Perfect. So this is now looking great. Now, let's see if the search works. What if we search for something like 19, as in property 19? Unfortunately, we get no results and a server error. Now, why is that? Well, to be able to index these properties, meaning search through them, you have to create something known as indexes. So head over to Properties, Indexes, and create a new index. We need to be able to search through properties based on 3 indexes. The first one will be a full text, and it'll be based on the attribute of name in an ascending order. The second one will be a second index, also full text, and it'll be based on the address field, so that'll look something like this. And then finally, the third one will be a full text based on the type. So now if I create it, go back to my app, remove this 19, we get all the properties. And then if I search for 19, looks like nothing got returned. But what if I try to filter it, like in a studio or villa? Okay, there we go. In this case, we have 3 different villas. What about houses? Yep, we have 3 different houses as well. So the filtering is working perfectly. We don't have any condos or duplexes, but we do have villas and houses. For you, it's going to be different because the data is completely randomized. To show you that the search works, maybe we can search for something like a house, and now we get back all the houses. Yep, even though we have a filter for that, that works too as well. Perfect. So now that we know that we're getting the featured properties, the recommended properties, and we can search and filter, it's time to implement the Explore page. Just before we begin working on the Explore page, let's quickly look into this error at the bottom, saying that each child in a list should have a unique key property. And we can try to fix that by actually passing the item.$ID right here to the key extractor of the flat list. So do it right here at the top. And you also need to do it at the bottom. So that's going to be a key extractor where we have a flat list and you have a key extractor of item.$ID. But it looks like that's not the thing that's complaining here. The issue is in the scroll view. The issue seems to be somewhere within the filters. So let's head over to the filters component and let's see how we're mapping over all of these filters. We have categories.map where each one of these touchable opacities is being mapped over, but it looks like we're not providing a specific key. So if I do that and if I now reload, hopefully now we will have no more warnings or errors on the homepage. Perfect. This is looking great. So now we can head over into our new page, which is the Explore page. It's going to be under App, Root, Tabs, and Explore.tsx. So let's go ahead and implement it. And implementing the Explore page will be super simple, as it is very similar to our homepage. If you think about it, they're almost exactly the same, besides we don't have access to the featured properties, and we're showing both the search and the filters on top. So to start off with the Explore page, let's actually copy the entire index.tsx, everything, copy it and paste it right here into Explore. And then let's save it. Let's navigate over to the Explore page, of course, after reloading our application, and then we can clean it up a bit. For example, we will no longer need to fetch the latest properties, so we can remove it. We don't need to have the info about the user here because we don't need to greet them. We can rename this to Explore. We can keep the use effect and the other fetch. And then we can start modifying this part. We show all the properties and we render a card for each one. But we will change up the list header component. It'll be significantly simpler than before. So let's actually remove it entirely by deleting this entire view. And let's recreate it, specifically for the Explore page. We'll do that to hide the feature properties. So head over to Explore, And let's give this view a class name equal to padding x of 5. And immediately within it, let's render the search component. Every time you reload, you'll have to head over to Explore manually. And now, as you can see, we only have the properties. Nothing else is being visible. So let's create another view right below the search with a class name equal to margin top of 5 with a text element that'll say found. And then we can render properties dot length properties like this. So how many properties match our search term? And we can also render filters right here above that piece of text. So if we further want to filter them, we can. Let's also give this text a class name equal to text-xl, font-rubric-bold, text-black 300, and let's divide it a bit from the top by giving it a margin top of 5. Perfect. So now we have the home, which looks like this. It greets you, says good morning JavaScript mastery, has the list of featured properties and more. But then if you want to explore it further, you head over to Explore and you can search for more properties. What you can do here if you want to is change the limit. So for example, on the Explore page, we can change the limit from 6 to 20. And immediately you will get a list of 20 different properties instead of 6, because here we have more space to scroll and explore them. And you can also filter them based on house, condo, duplex, villas, and so on. Now we can also modify it just a tiny bit by adding this part at the top as well, the back arrow, as well as the title, search for your ideal home, and then the notifications bell. I'll do that within the list header component by creating an additional view right here below the first view that'll have a class name equal to flex-row, items-center, justify-between, and a margin top of 5. And within it, we can render a touchable opacity, which is that button. And on press, we can call a callback function where we're going to call the router dot back. So we'll simply head to the page back. In this case, it'll most likely be the home page. We can also give this button a class name equal to flex-row, bg-primary-200, rounded-full, size of 11, items-center, and justify-center as well. Of course, we have to put something within it. So let's actually render an image. And this image will have a source equal to icons back arrow, as well as a class name equal to size-5. And if we save it, looks like my screen got frozen there for a second. But now, as you can see, there's a back arrow, which actually takes you back to the previous screen you were on. This makes it very simple to go back to the homepage. Now, let's head below this touchable opacity right here. Still within the same view, I'll render another piece of text. And this one will say search for your ideal home. And we can also give it a class name equal to text-base, margin right of 2, text-center, font-rubric-medium, as well as text-black-300. Finally, to the other side, we can render an image that'll have a source equal to icons.bell with a class name equal to w-6 and h-6 as well. Of course, we have to nicely position these three elements. So let's see the view that they're within. It's this view right here that has a class name of flex-row, item center, justify between. Oh, this was supposed to be between. And now it's nicely positioned right here at the top, differentiating the home page from the Explore page. Just to make sure, the search and filtering functionalities still work. So that is great. And believe it or not, our Explore page is now done. We have a beautiful looking homepage, the Explore page, and then also a profile page that allows you to log out. The last remaining piece of the puzzle of this great application is, of course, the property details page right here under property ID that we get redirected to when you click any one of these properties. And since you developed all of this so far, we were working with fetching different pieces of data and displaying that data on the homepage, I actually wanted to test your knowledge a bit to see whether you can put what you've learned so far into practice. So in the next lesson, I'll share with you a quick exercise I prepared for you. Oh, and one more thing before we do that. It looks like I forgot to put the $ right here before the price on the cards. So let's head over to the cards and let me add the $ right here, or feel free to add your own currency sign. I'll add it to both of the cards. There we go. Now our homepage and explore sections are truly completed because we are reusing the same cards there. So with that in mind, let's move on to the assignment. And welcome to the final lesson of this course. In this one, I want to put your skills to the test and see what you have learned from this course. What I think you learned is how to fetch data from an external source, such as a database, in this case from Appwrite, and then display it on the homepage. You also learned how to implement authentication, but now I want you to fetch some additional pieces of data, such as property details, and display it on the longest screen of this application, and the most beautiful one as well, where you have to create a gallery component showing different photos of that property, and then show the title, rating, amenities, agent info, the overview, facilities, gallery, location, reviews, and more. But I won't simply tell you, hey, go ahead and do this. That's it. You have the design. Now it's your turn. Nope, we'll do it JavaScript Mastery Pro style. Yep, I prepared an additional active lesson for you. Active lessons are not new. Well, they are new to YouTube, but not to JS Mastery Pro. See, in our Ultimate Next.js 15 course, we have scattered many different active lessons throughout the course. For example, one of these active lessons is implementation of the left sidebar. So if you open it up, you'll see that we have a video explaining that lesson, as well as testing you on what you've learned so far, giving you practical hands-on experience. You get a task, resources, hints designed to enhance your understanding, and then it's up to you to build it. So that looks something like this. The entire task is explained in detail. Then I give you examples of what you need to make it happen and resources that might help you in making it happen. And finally, if you're stuck, you even get a complete hint that helps you implement it. Now I prepared a similar thing for you for this last lesson in this course. The task is to create a dynamic route by fetching data from an Appwrite database, helping you understand how to develop React Native screens with data fetched from a specific source. If you haven't yet gotten the design, you can do so here. Here you have the resources to make it happen, and here's an explanation of what exactly you need to do with step-by-step explanations for each part. And if you're still confused on how you need to do it at the end, I have also provided some final code. So with that in mind, take some time right now and go ahead and build it. And let me know in the comments on how did you do. Make sure to pause this video right now because I will continue with implementing this final solution in 3, 2, 1. Okay, so let's do it. I'll just grab the final code, but hopefully you implemented it on your own. I'll head back to the appwrite.ts file below get properties, and I'll create a new function, get property by ID. After that, I'll copy the code for the actual screen. It's a long screen, I know. And finally, there's an additional component called comment.tsx that we're using within this screen. So I'll head over to components and create a new component called comment.tsx and paste the code right here. If you do that and click on one of these properties, you'll be redirected to a property details screen. Looking great, right? And you can now also go back and check out some additional properties. Beautiful. Hopefully you are able to complete at least some parts of this screen on your own. If not, try to really look into the final code in detail so you can understand what's happening behind the scenes. With that in mind, great job on building this entire application. And it just feels so good being able to hold my phone in my hand and swipe through the screens that we have created. It feels a bit different than moving across a website with your mouse or with your keyboard. This feels much more natural, and it feels so good knowing that we're able to develop mobile applications by using the power of React. With that in mind, thank you so much for coming to the end of this amazing course. More React Native content is coming very soon to jsmastery.pro. So if you haven't checked it out yet, head over to jsmastery.pro and be one of the first people to sign up for our new platform, which will have a lot of React Native content. Once again, thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next one. Have a wonderful day.